What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? We are back again. I want to get it started by saying this is the first episode of Riot Starter TV of the quote-unquote new year. We had an awesome, blacknificent, heavy-duty run in 2021, and we're looking forward to keeping that rolling. So I wanted to get this year started off right, man, because we have so much ahead of us. If it's your first time stopping through Black Power Media, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you all checking in and stopping through here. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, to our platform, and let folks know, that we're in the building tonight. What I wanted to do, I've been hearing folks say that our platform has been somewhat left heavy, and we've been lacking culture. I don't know how can we lack culture because of the fact that we've had folks on from all over the diaspora. You know what I mean? Everyone from, as many of you know, from Frantz Fanon's daughter to Patrice Lumumba's daughter, and so on and so forth. So many different heavyweights from the BLA to all parts of the Black Liberation Movement, etc. What I wanted to do tonight is, back in the day, I used to go to a spot in New York called First World Alliance. First World Alliance was and is an institution. And if I'm correct, it was started by Brother Bill and Sister Kepra, and also Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben. And there were so many different giants that would come through there. To me, it was like the Madison Square Garden of culture. One of the folks that we would see that would come through teaching, amongst others, was Dr. Leonard Jeffries. And for folks who are from the tri-state area, you can remember back during the 80s, he was really, really giving the New York establishment hell. You know what I'm saying? He was running up against folks like former Mayor Ed Koch. You know what I'm saying? And he was giving them the business and so many others, but what I want to do is I'm gonna give you a light bio for folks who aren't familiar. Dr. Leonard Jeffries is a political scientist, historian, educator, and Pan-Africanist. He's a founding director and former vice president and president of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, which is known as ASCAC. Jeffries was known for his African-centered scholarship. He's achieved national prominence in the early 90s for his historical statements about Zionist Jews and European people in general. In the 1991 speech he gave, he allegedly stated that Jews financed the slave trade and used the movie industry to hurt Black people, and that whites are ice people while Africans are sun people. Jeffries was discharged from his position as chairman of the Black Studies Department at City College in New York, and he had a which led to a lengthy legal battle. We're gonna get into that and a whole lot more. I had the opportunity to speak to him for probably about 3 hours a couple weeks ago, and I learned so much each time. We hear from him, we hear something different. So tonight, we wanted to, without further ado, bring you the honorable, legendary Dr. Leonard Jeffries.
Hotep, brother.
Hotep. Hey, Black Power. How you doing, brother? How's everything going with you?
Well, I'm still raise that Black Power fist.
No doubt.
If necessary, put that ready for the revolution.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Posture.
Yes, sir.
But I'm glad that you're able to take this vehicle putting the information out for our people and being able to tap into some of the historical focuses that we need. Knowledge is power, and knowledge of African peoples and their circumstance and situations is their empowerment. So we can't run from this knowledge. We've got to go to it to enhance ourselves. And because the struggle continues, it is a continuous one. And you can take a little breather here and there, but you got to get ready to get back on the battlefield. So fortunately, having grown up in Newark, New Jersey, with a family, a mother, uncles, and associates that wanted us to know what our history was, so that we did not wait for Europeans to bring a sanitized version of our history. We had it programmed by our people. My mother was 5 foot or so. My father was 6'5" or 7. He was physically a giant, but she was the one that had this knowledge of who and what we are. And so she, my pablum, as I told folks, I am what I am because other people laid down the path. My pablum was not Dick, Jane, and Spock, Little Red Riding Hood and the 7 Drawers or all that mess. My pablum was Booker T, W.E.B, and Marcus Garvey. And, so that from an early age, I was in the middle of this knowledge. And in fact, one of the first books, Charles, that I was given as a youngster was not nursery rhymes, but this particular book was mine. And I was so proud to have this book, Booker T. Washington, A Child of Slavery. And so as a young kid, instead of having the children's material, we were introduced to serious struggle of our people. And then I was born on my grandfather's birthday, my mother's father, January 19th, 1937. Well, he was born January the 19th, 1888. Wow. So that I was actually born on my grandfather's birthday. And so that meant that this little Lenny, who came into the world, he had a special mission. And so I'm glad that my mother didn't hesitate to lay it out for us and then take us down south so that we could see what the conditions were and what our people had. And they had their farms, they had their communities, they built their own schools. They were not waiting in the darkness for the Europeans to bring the light. They were raising the light up for their own development. So the foundation is deep, the soil is fertile, and it includes also the Native Americans. And my mother said, her mother was Powhatan Indian, Pocahontas' people. I said, Ma, really? And of course, she proved it, that the Powhatan Indian Nation was a part of our family. In fact, her grandfather, he refused to accept completely the Christian formula that we had used to adjust to. So he had businesses and other activity. And when he died, the rumor was he didn't want that complete Christian burial. And so he didn't die right. It meant that he wanted to have some Native American traditions woven into his passing. But the beautiful thing was he helped to generate monies that was passed down through the family even after he left here. The children, my mother's brothers and sisters, were receiving money from his legacy. He had a blacksmith shop. He had a boating operation. So this is, when we talk about the South and we talk about slavery and we talk about oppression of white folks, for me, it was good to see that we were able to go through that process and then stand up on our own feet and then wage a battle of serious survival and development.
Right on. Right on. Yeah, yeah. That's definitely powerful to have that legacy and on both ends. So you had no choice but to struggle, not to fight.
That's right. In other words, it was ours to use and not abuse.
That's right.
And then she also said that we had a close relationship with W.E.B. Du Bois. I said, Ma, really? She said, yes. And again, one of her aunties was tied into Du Bois's research. And so one of her aunties was Du Bois's secretary. And she got a strong education. And so she was a big help to him. And I didn't realize it was true until they had a newspaper headline in New Jersey that said the wife of so-and-so was really the legitimate wife of this professor, this white professor, a Frenchman. And I said, goodness. And when he died, she inherited his libraries and things like that. Well, Du Bois had been involved with the struggle in Virginia when he wrote one of his great work is The Philadelphia Negro. And he was studying the migration out of Virginia into the North, into specifically Philadelphia. And so he took Farmville, Virginia as the model of migration out. And the migration was to the 7th District of Philadelphia. And my nephew, Dr. Hassan Jeffries, he actually pointed to a 38-page section in one of Du Bois's works that dealt with Farmville, Virginia. He studied the makeup, the institutions and the organizations and the migration patterns. And so there's actually a section of the Philadelphia Negro that includes a 38-page analysis of the migration out and the ability of Black folk to take control of their destiny. So many of us get into an argument over, well, Du Bois was this and Garvey was that and Malcolm was this. But we have to see them all dealing with this system of domination, destruction, and death, which is how the European domination of the economics of the world and the politics of the world and the culture of the world in order for super exploitation to take place. And that's the basis for the international slave trade system. And so we need to see it, understand it, figure out how did our people survive, and then how can we survive it? Because they certainly were able to go through the system as non-persons with no rights and humanity messed with. White folks knew we were human. They knew we were very powerful, but they wasn't going to give us that understanding. They wanted to say that we were a thing, unworthy, had no rights. But then when you realize, like Thomas Jefferson, the greatest of our white folks in this nation, he was my favorite. I called him TJ. And then I had a book this thick, which I left up back in the study. And that book was on TJ and his lady, Sally Hemings. And then there's another book, that thick too, on T.J. Thomas Jefferson and his cousin. And his cousin was so anti-slavery that he, what did he do? He was called Citizen Richard. And
After the French Revolution.
He was inspired by the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And so he called himself Citizen Richard. And then when his father, and he was cousin of Jefferson now, his father gave him a lot of Africans, 80 to 100 Africans. He said that he could not accept them. But the beautiful thing was, he said that he's not going to subject them to slavery either. So he worked out a relationship with his wife. But after he dies, she gets the legacy. And then her commitment was that she would agree to the freedom for these Africans. Now, the enslaved Africans. Now, they were not left. And his thing was, you can't say you freed somebody and leave them in a society without anything. So they needed land. They needed resources. And so his will, one of the greatest documents in American history, read that these Africans were to be free and that you couldn't survive without support. So land, 400 acres of land next to Farmville, Virginia, was given to the Africans, and they call that, what do they call it, Charles?
What was it again?
Israel. In other words, they
Israel Hill.
Israel Hill. Yeah. See, Charles is hanging around doing a lot of things and helping us get these things, but he also has to learn. He also Israel Hill. You don't have to get it. You gonna get the book. So, all right. Israel Hill is a fantastic story of Black folk who were given a helping hand by the European American. And the beauty of it was they did not want the free Black to have land or freed Blacks to have it. And Charles is, he's so quick that he was able to, in a minute, run up to the library.
Charles Flash, huh?
Yeah, Charles was stepping. He didn't miss a beat.
Shout out to Charles Flash over there. That's his name for the show today.
Israel on the Potomac, a Southern experiment in Black freedom from the 1790s through to the fellow who, through the Civil War, the fellow who produced it is a white youngster. Not youngster. This is his picture. He doesn't have any hair, but so he ain't no youngster. But his name, yes, his name was Eli, Melvin Patrick Eli, and he's written several important works. And he refers to the Southern experiment in Black freedom through the sea. So you can't say Thomas Jefferson didn't have an example to follow. You know, we give him too much credit that he was freedom, justice, and equality, and all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
And, so I actually went to the University of Virginia. You know, I'm supposed to have this fantastic global knowledge, studied at the white Ivy League schools, semi-Ivy League schools, studied in Europe. I've been back and forth to Africa, so I have all this knowledge, and it's real. And so that I have a chance to show off every once in a while. And so I was going to the University of Virginia to speak, and I was beating up on white slavers, including Jefferson. And the students, hundreds of them, they was all nervous, and I mean they wasn't accepting my beating on them. And then all of them wanted to let me know that talking about Thomas Jefferson and his contradictions was nothing significant for them. In fact, they gloried in the knowledge that he had the contradiction because the student newspaper at the University of Virginia was called the Sally Hemings.
Wow.
In other words, they had actually taken this Jefferson, the great hero, and stripped him of his drawers. And there he was standing for the whole world to see. He ain't got it all there that he's supposed to have. And so it was a great moment for me to go and see these youngsters. And I was wondering why they were so in the position that they were. They wanted to let me know that they had this knowledge. What I did as a young scholar was to go into the study of how these Black folk got the land, how they built a free community next to Farmville, Virginia, and then how some of them were able to go into court and get the same rights. Some of them were able to develop control of the moving of trade on the Appomattox River. They had what they called the bateau, and bateau in French means boat. And they were the people who moved the trade up and down the Appomattox River and from Richmond or Petersburg into the hinterland. So it's good to have this knowledge and make it work for you, but also have a plan. And my plan is to show that African peoples fought and for their dignity and fought to maintain it. And they understood the contradictions that a Jefferson had. In fact, everybody is so proud of Jefferson in the American context that he built a master plantation called Monticello or Monticello, however you want to pronounce it. But most people don't know that Jefferson had 4 plantations. This man was plantation nuts. In other words, his life was not the grandeur of being American founding father. His daily life was being a person who had 4 plantations. So, and then had the luxury of having access to the Black women. And so he designed Monticello, and they show he was inspired by the French architecture, and he built this domed home and with pillars and whatnot. He also designed the access to the slave quarters, the enslaved community living behind Monticello. He had it set up where there was a ladder construction at the back of his house that could easily be brought down for the Black women to go up and be of comfort for this so-called founding father, the great founding father. So that's why we need to know the full history and work it. And so I'm glad that I wanted to be a lawyer. I grew up with the NAACP. My mother sent me down to, when I was 13, to 15 Elm Street, which is in back of the City Hall in Newark. And that's an old community of these old townhouses. And then 15 Elm was the home of Mrs. Grace Baxter Fenderson. And her father was the principal of the Black school, in Newark. In fact, he was so prominent that when they started building housing projects, they named a very nice housing project, low rise. They named it Baxter Terrace after Miss Grace Baxter Fenderson's father. And when she saw this little black kid, 12 or 13, come knocking on her door, she was kind of taken back, and she said, "How are you? Who are you doing? Can I help you?" Yes, and I told her I came down here to join the movement. And she said, "Well, you came to the right place, so come on in." So she sat me down and we talked, and she got into what I was doing, and I told her, I said, "Well, I'm president of my grammar school, and eighth grade president, and I was preparing my graduation at the end of January." And she said, "You're presenting?" She said, "Yes, the president has to present, and then he introduces the students to the whole auditorium." So she said, "Have you prepared it?" I said, "Yes, I'm ready." And so she really got excited. She said, "Well, look, could you present it now?" And so I said, "Yes, I'm ready to go." So I did, and she was taken aback. She said that this youngster, he's got it together. So she said, "Look, our biggest fundraiser in the NAACP is the Lincoln Douglas dinner, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass." And so she said, "I want you to be a part of that."
Wow.
And so without hesitation, I said, "Yes, I'd be glad to do it." And of course, when I got back home, I told my mother said, "Yes," and in fact, that's what she wanted to happen. So I got my initiation in terms of presenting ideas on our struggle from our own people. And of course, there were only out of 100 kids, there were only 5 or 6 of us. And the students elected me simply because they realized that I had multi-talents. It was not, my mother had me playing a saxophone.
Right.
I even played a sax at my graduation. And my brother was mentioning that she gave you half the pantry to develop your film. So I used to take my pictures and then develop them myself. And so, and since I was born on her father's birthday, and she loved her father, Edward Beecher Smith, and Beecher, they put that Harriet Beecher Stowe in his name.
Okay.
And so you have to see Black folks, what I'm referring to is socialization. Socialization is how you get your beliefs, your role models, your patterns of behavior, how you become who and what you are. And I use the triangle shape of the pyramid as a manifestation of appreciating this dialectic between one polarity and the other polarity. And so that, in fact, in a book that was published, it was published by somebody who I didn't know, somebody who knew of my struggles and my work. And so he took the work and he put it in book form using Jeffries' triangle, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Again, using that dialectic, that duality that's a part of the ancient civilization. And then I developed this tunis, and in the center you have the value system, spirituality. So we have the African a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, economics, politics, and culture. But then you have the European turned upside down, and you have the 3 Ds, domination, destruction, and death, as opposed to the 3 Cs, communal, cooperative, and collective spiritual development. So this brother had the Jeffries speeches, the Jeffries court cases, African American resistance and accommodation tradition, African American resistance and the revolutionary tradition. He was able to take an article I wrote on African American source, the search for truth and knowledge, African American, the African American resistance, rebellion tradition, South Carolina rebellion against slavery, Denmark Vesey, and then you also have the resistance continuing with Nat Turner and whatnot. So this brother took the Jeffries work and published it.
Right on.
He took Reclaiming Nile Valley Civilization, an article I wrote in reference to Cheikh Anta Diop and Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. And then he took the Albany speech, which had everybody upset, and he published it. And
this is a brother you didn't know?
This is somebody I didn't know. Still don't know him. Brother Reggie called him up. He handled our computer stuff. And Brother Reggie had found this thing, and he was selling a hardback like this, a relatively hardback, for $13.95. And if you got it loose, just printed out, you got it for $9.95. And so he never contacted me. I did talk to him, and I wasn't going to beat up anybody who was, where's my glasses, Joe? Anybody who was, where are you going?
I want you to know, Dr. Jeffries, not to cut you off, man. We had a whole lot of good people in the chat today. Shout out to the legendary Curtis Blow in the chat. You know,
hey, that's one of our students at City. Yes.
He said you taught him a lot, and we got to get Curtis Blow on the show too. So definitely, get with us on that.
So this brother, I had to give him credit. In other words, he calls it the Dr. Leonard Jeffries Reader, and then he opens it up with, and this is unbelievable, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. The Dr. Leonard Jeffries information contained in this reader has been compiled from various websites. As a student of history and politics, which I believe all Black people should be, amongst other things, I find Dr. Jeffries to be one of those scholars, scientists, lecturers, and historians that we all should be aware of. Through the information obtained within which is freely available on the web, I decided to compile the most interesting and useful pieces because the internet has its limitations too, and who needs to be in and attached attached to it all the time. With that in mind, please read. As you read, learn, grow, challenge, and pave the way for others. Now, that's, hey, I'll take it.
You next with that. Right.
Other books by Jesse Sharp, adult poetry, Men Folk Talking, Hurry Home, The War Chronicles. All at Thought with My Brothers. Education we've had for the children. This guy, I didn't know about him, but what he's doing, it really made sense. And so it was, this copyright is 2005, but he published this earlier than that, and even have a poem dedicated to me. So when you have young people like this, he has in the back Now this is the back of this. He's got using my pyramid analysis on the front, and
Right.
on the back he has the court case.
Wow.
And so I'm so glad people said, shouldn't you sue him? So I said, sue him for what? For bringing the knowledge out? No, he has the Third Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, and then he has August 1993 is when we had the case. It was argued in January the 21st, 1994, and that's my birthday, January 19th.
Speaking of that, Dr. Jeffries, your birthday is in what, like another 2 weeks? You mind us talking about your age because of the fact that I think that I don't think folks understand, the level of information, the decades of work that you put in, close to a century, for lack of better words. I mean,
yes. Most people need to. I've been blessed to be with these. They have the elders lay down a path for us and put their hands on us.
That's right.
So Dr. John Henry Clark was my number one inspiration.
Right.
And then, of course, he had a partner, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen. So I'm a product, direct manifestation of the genius of those two brothers, instilling it in us. Now, by us, I mean, you're talking about tiger cubs all over the world that they touched, and most of us don't know that. Well, Dr. Ben said this, and Dr. Ben said, no, Dr. Ben did this, and Dr. Ben did that. Well, Dr. Clark did that, and then he didn't have no degrees. He taught the people who had degrees the knowledge that they needed. And so when you had two brothers like that, who had hands on us and knew our potential and opened the doors for us. So I'm not just talking about opening the doors for myself and my partners like Professor James Small, but I'm talking about opening the doors for brothers like Asa Hilliard.
That's right.
Ace is one of the best of us. In fact, I say he was the best of us. Coming from some deep roots. His mother was an evangelist. She was a very powerful evangelist, a woman evangelist. Now, when she went into a church in St. Louis or wherever they were, the preacher stopped and said, we have to acknowledge evangelist Minnie, who has arrived. I mean, that was Ace's grandma.
Wow.
And then his grandfather, great-grandfather, had left the South, Georgia, wherever, and went walking with three of his buddies to Texas in order to catch up with his grandmother. And he got to Texas and married her. So when you have a grandfather who was able to cross the Mississippi
on foot,
yes,
that's a bad dude.
And the others got scared and turned back, but he was on a mission. So Asa has those type of genes. Now Asa was light and bright, and you might mistake him for one of the mulatto elite. No, but Asa was the best of us.
Right.
And then he had a cousin, and his cousin was Jake Carruthers, a little diminutive brother like Dr. Clark. But again, a giant in terms of setting up the Chicago school.
Intellectual warfare, one of the heaviest.
Intellectual warfare, that's one of the heaviest statements.
Yes.
Can explain who and what we are and what we have to do.
That's right.
And so he expanded that out to other brothers like Anderson Thompson and Conrad Worrell and the sisters. All of these brothers, including myself, could not be who we are without the mothers, the aunties, and our wives. Right. And so you can be out there by yourself intellectually masturbating, or you can be within the family and taking that family to new higher levels as families. And that's what we did. Dr. Clark showed it could be done. In fact, he grew up in Union Springs, Alabama, and next door was Georgia. And so he grew up in Union Springs, but the family finally moved into Georgia. And so he had this deep Southern experience. And he says, however, the key to his growth and development were these women.
Right.
3 women. He called them 3 deities changed my life. As a little kid, I was so desirous by my family. They called me Bubba. And the 3 women were his mother, his grandmother, and his 5th grade school teacher, Evelina Taylor. And so they did a lot of laundering and stuff, and got the white folks up and did the laundry. And then they put a sheet over a covering over the laundry and put him on the truck and dragged him back home. But they recognized his genius and they nurtured it. And so that's why I'm saying we may be looking for some big figure in our lives, and the big figure will be a grandmother, auntie. My father's one of his oldest sisters, he's the youngest of 13, coming up out of Georgia. And when his father was murdered by the Klan in 1917, Aunt Bessie, the family left, and they went up to Akron, Ohio, to Cleveland, and to Youngstown, Ohio, because the rubber industry, the car industry, was getting started. And so the mother, when she was getting older, she told her daughter, one of her older daughters, to come from Newark to Akron and take Isabel. And then after that, come and get Leonard, the baby. That was my father, 6'5" baby. But that's how he grew. He wanted to be part of the Negro Leagues. That's why my brother and I thought we was going into the Negro Leagues too. We went to see Jackie Robinson and Don Newcomb, the great pitcher. He had a package store and a bar restaurant at the end of our block. And so that when you talked about becoming involved, the concept that I like to put out is that what made us strong and saved us from becoming wide-eyed was the concept of the village. 14th Street. I lived on 14th Street with my family. Across were other Black families. Robert Spellman, who became Dr. Robert Spellman. I went on Crossroads Africa in 1961 to Ivory Coast. Spellman, following me, he went in 1965. Across next to him was Dr. Sam Foster. He became the principal of Quitman Street School, the largest middle school in New Jersey. Dr. Samuel Foster headed that. One of our young people, Presley Woods, who lost his mother and father, the families didn't send them to no orphanage. They raised them. And Presley became the 8th grade president of Sussex Avenue School. Now, here, these Black men, all of them thought they was going to be athletes. And Percy actually was all state, and he left Newark and went down and started teaching in Brazil. So the way to understand me and others like Amiri Baraka and others who grew up in Newark, you have to see our communities as African villages. That white folks was around. They might have lived next door or even might have lived in the same building. But we were not guided by the white domination. We had this African-American process of socialization. So we were proud of each other. So Amiri Baraka, who developed Leroy Jones until he changed his name, he lived in another part of Newark that was a little rougher. We called it the Hill. That was a little rougher than other places. Where we lived on 14th Street, every Black person owned their home. They made sure they got those white folks were glad to sell them to us, because when we started coming in their neighborhood, said, "Oh, we got to get around here and go out to the suburbs."
Yeah.
So they went out into these little white homes, homes for, they call them, what's the town they call it, Charles? You got Levittown. These little Levittown homes where you get a nice little small home. But these homes that the white folks left were multi-purpose homes. They not only handled your family, but there was enough room for a finished basement. There was enough room for a 3-bedroom, a 3-room apartment upstairs. So 3 aspects of your family could live together. All of them had decent backyards where you could put up storage and whatnot. And so this whole thing of the village, and our sister, unfortunately, she wanted to be a sister. She liked black folk, and I'm talking about President. No, the one who liked the little girls. You know, he lost his job because
you talking about the governor? Yeah, you talking about
No, y'all, you got to take me back. Clinton. Didn't Clinton get involved with that red dress or something with some semen on? I mean, we don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Clinton got stuck in my throat was his wife.
Right.
The wife has been given credit for this concept that it takes a village to raise a child.
Right.
That doesn't go deep enough. The real deal is, and I've been involved in more African villages than very few people, it takes a whole village to raise a child. So 14th Street, 13th Street, where my mother's family lived, 12th Street, where my father's family lived, those 3 and 4 blocks, 15th Street goes into East Orange, and then part of our family lived into East Orange. Those communities were villages. You couldn't go nowhere without the people knowing you. You couldn't go nowhere without them. You couldn't be doing nothing, smoking weed or something. You'd have to be cool, because if so-and-so saw you, mama saw you, she gonna grab you and give you a swack on your behind or knock you in the head. And then she gonna take you to your mama. And then your mama gonna do whatever damage she could do and say, wait here until your daddy come. Don't move. Right. And then my father was 6'5". I never wanted that big hand to come next to my behind or any part of me. So luckily I had a little brother 2 years younger, so I always could blame him. I was just running after Marlon. I really didn't, it wasn't me. But we had the African training in Newark, New Jersey and other cities. And that's what has to be understood, that we, as individuals, we couldn't stand out by ourselves. We had to stand with others. And in fact, my brother, he got into the Central State. I went to the white school, Lafayette College in Eastern Pennsylvania, integrated. And I went there. I got accepted in all the schools. I got accepted in Rutgers, like Paul Robeson and other schools. But I went to Lafayette College because Sonny Green, one of my buddies from Newark, New Jersey, and we used to do doo-wop and all that stuff on the steps and play stickball and then have our own little basketball and baseball thing. And so Sonny Green, of the 2 black students at Lafayette College, one of them was a brother I grew up with in Newark, New Jersey. So I didn't pick prestige. I got into Colgate. That's where Reverend Adam Clayton Powell went to school. I got into Rutgers. That's where Paul Robeson went to school. I went to where I had me one of my partners from the stoop. And so Sonny was there. He was getting ready to study engineering. When I went there, I wanted to be a Thurgood Marshall. So my thing was to go into law. So I'm saying that this control of the socialization, which allows you to have a socialization and then an acculturation, and that leads to your fuller development. So that the person who understood that were these 2 brothers, and here is one of his works. This is a biography of Dr. Clark.
Right.
But the important work of Dr. Clark is what he produced. And so his own work, the sister that produced this is Barbara Adams, and she, Barbara Eleanor Adams, she wrote a biography of Dr. Clark, and she had and had it published. She was one of his students, and she herself got her doctorate. And then she didn't stop there. She went and got a doctorate. She took my story and did a biography of myself. But eventually she went home to visit her roots of her family in Guyana, and then she got sick. But Dr. Barbara Adams has to be acknowledged in terms of that continuity that we're talking about. And
I want to ask you, because you talked about the village in North, and I know that for folks who are unaware, you have these international ties that go just beyond the continent. You know what I'm saying? When I last spoke to you, talked about Cheikh Anta Diop. You talked about Frantz Fanon, and several others.
yes,
How did you go from Newark to being an associate of Cheikh Anta Diop? How did that take place? What was that road like? Because of the fact that you make it sound easy, like you just stepped off the stoop and went to college and everything was cool from there. But we know that it took a whole lot to to paint this picture.
yes. Well, one of the things that you have to credit your aunties or your the significant people in your life who wanted to open up these opportunities for you. And so this Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Smith. Now we walked down the street, end of that block. We knocked on all the doors. Oh, the twins, Ronnie and Junior, Sammy and Percy and whatnot. And the 15 of us little black youngsters walked down to the Sunday school. Now the mothers took the sisters down, the daughters down, but these brothers, we're tough enough to go down on our own. And then when we got to the Sunday school, there was Mrs. Smith. And Mrs. Smith was there not only to deal with our Sunday school lessons, she was there to deal with us as black youngsters. And she put her hands heavy on us. And we appreciated her so that was Sunday morning. We didn't stay for the late service, and I was glad that I didn't stay, that my mother would let us go home, because I couldn't handle people jumping up, screaming and yelling and talking about Jesus. I didn't know what all that was. And I was hoping that my mother would not jump up and embarrass me. But Aunt Bessie jumped up because she was the head of the choir. And so we had all of this that we had to negotiate, and it worked. Mrs. Smith had us Sunday school boys come to her house on Monday and for milk and oatmeal cookies. But that wasn't the game. It was to lay out this consciousness that you are somebody, etc. So after many years, hundreds of us met in East Orange, the neighboring town, to honor Mrs. Smith. In other words, that's the type of transferring of values that we had growing up. And my brother had a chance to go to Central State, and so did Spellman, Robert Spellman, and so he was in the service, and eventually he left the service and he went to Central State. Now, when Spellman's sister was going to Central State, he called my brother and said, "Wait a minute, Jeff." In fact, my brother's had a special name. I'm not even going to talking about it. He was such a lovely little youngster. They gave him a special little name. You know how people call Puntnings and all kinds of used to call us a little name. So, but my brother, to come against that, he became a martial arts specialist. But when he went to Central State, and some of our family from Ohio he was able to use their address to get state tuition. When Spellman's sister was ready to go, and she chose Central State, Spellman called my brother and said, "You got a responsibility." My brother said, "What are you talking about?" "My sister is going to Central State. You got to look after her. Don't be letting nobody mess with my sister." And so this is the type of support we had. My favorite cousin, Dolores, DC was my favorite cousin, but next door to me was Sonny Catino. And him and my mother were, Kizzy, were best friends. They did a lot of traveling. And then Sonny and I she was pregnant. Our people were pregnant at the same time. The question was, who was going to come out first? And I was enjoying my little maneuvering in the womb, and I wasn't anxious to come out. And but after a while, the people got tired of me, and they pulled me out with these forceps. And so I came out January 19th. Sonny came out January 26th. And we were raised as virtual brothers. Even I had a biological brother, but I had a birth brother. And Sonny's older sister, Dolores, she went to Central State. And she was a beautiful sister. She was the homecoming queen. So I'm saying that we had a way of passing down responsibility and backing it up, and not having people live as individuals in a nice little suburban home or one of the better neighborhoods. We had this African family responsibility. And so that Sammy Foster, again, as a teacher, he became the principal of Quitman Street School. That was the largest school in New Jersey. So how could all of these instances just be happenstance? No, they organized and planned this. My mother and them sent us away to camp. And I never did like the camp because I never liked that little breakfast of toast and some cream stuff on. So I just couldn't handle the camp. I wanted to come back, but it was in Pennsylvania. So I wasn't going to come back. When I was growing up, my mother had me stay with my grandfather because we were born on the same day. And she wanted Papa to appreciate one of his grandchildren. And then my mother's youngest sister, she had a child, and they called this little cute thing Pinky. And of course, and my mother had my brother. So you had three little boys, me, the oldest one, little Lenny, and then my brother, who they gave him the nickname Puddin'. And then you had Pinky, and who was my auntie's firstborn. But I realized when I did an assessment of things that I couldn't compete with no little boy called Pinky. I said, that didn't make, that's unfair competition. And certainly, so what I did was I took my clothes, wrapped them up like Huckleberry Finn, threw them on my back, a shoulder, and walked home from Papa's house back to my house. And the people said they saw this little boy going up and down the street. I followed the trolley tracks. And I stopped to get a drink of water and stuff like this. And I got home, and the people said, "How did you do it?" I said, "I knew the car barn was at the end of our block, so I just followed it." So my mother never tried to put us in that situation. And Pinky became the favorite of Papa. But of course, those little favorite and unfavorite mean that it wasn't a conflict situation. It was who was going to give Papa the greatest security that his legacy was being followed. And so one of the great brothers who Amiri Baraka was close to was Councilman Tucker. And this brother grew up in the Pennington projects, just as Amiri Baraka grew up in the Hill. And that was a little rougher than other areas. But all of us got this sense of purpose and direction. My mother and father were friends of Amiri's mother and father. They had formed an organization called the Student Council. And the Student Council was a Black community group of adults planning how do we educate our young people. So when Amiri's father died, he was a big man in Bethany Baptist Church. He was a deacon, in fact. In fact, when Amiri went into the Black Power movement, he started producing dashikis and whatnot. His father switched over to his business and started designing and making dashikis. So even though he was in a deacon, elder in the Presbyterian Church, he was still supporting Amiri in putting together Kawaida, the consciousness and the spirit house, and all the things that he had moved from being with white folks in the village in New York into this Black consciousness in Newark, New Jersey. So he had helped to form the Black Power movement in Newark when they had the big activity. In fact, they're going to have the 50th anniversary of the meeting in Gary, Indiana. But Newark also had the Black Power Conference, which Amiri and others helped to develop. Now, I was there, and but I had just come back from studying in Europe. I went to study for 2 years in Switzerland. But when I came back and saw that white folks were using their cop position to mess with Black folk, I got up into the city council and I said, whether you all like it or not, this struggle's going to blow up because Black people ain't going to take no back seat. We're going to share Newark and with everybody else, and not be blocked here and blocked there. And I said, I didn't go to get a higher education at Columbia and then on to Europe to have some white fellow who doesn't even have a high school degree become the head of the Newark schools. I said, these people you see in the balcony and the people in the city hall, this is not the down and out. These are aspiring Black people. And if they are upset, this shit is going to, I didn't say shit, this stuff is going to blow up in your face. And my prediction was right. Within months, Newark blew up. One of the biggest urban rebellions. And since that time, they had to give Black people a place in the city and positions, et cetera. And so I did my undergraduate work on the urban crisis in America. And that's because I lived it and I was able to analyze it. I was able to be it. While we were there in the Newark City Hall for the Black Power Conference, it was near the City Hall for the Black Power Conference. It was actually at a hotel. When things got really rough and serious, Adam Clayton Powell and some of the big leaders were there. A Black woman with a big afro jumped up in the middle of the discussions. And the Black folks who had rebelled and they had got arrested and they put them in the jail in Newark. This woman had jumped up tall and statuesque with an afro, and it wasn't Angela Davis. It was our sister who became our leading theoretician in terms of philosophy. And she got up there and said, if you men in Newark don't have the sense and don't have the strength to go down to the jail and get those Black folks out of that, we women are going to do it. And I said, oh my God, if they go down to the jail, those kids I grew up with, those Italian youngsters, are ready for that. But of course, Malcolm X's assistant, Brother Omar, he got up, one of his bodyguards, he got up and he was able to say the right thing to keep our people from jumping up following this sister. And so she has been a great psychological image for us. And who am I talking about, John? They just honored her. You know, Tony Brado and them just honored her.
Oh, Francis Cress.
Francis Cress.
Wow.
Francis Cress Welsing walked up in the middle of this conference in Newark and said, if you men don't have the testicles to go down there and get our people out. We women and do it. And Brother Omar, fortunately, he had the right thing to say, that we will be getting ourselves organized, and this is what the Black Power Conference is all about. And boom, boom, boom. And so we kind of chilled, but we didn't chill for long, because before you knew it, word came that Detroit was going up. And so the Black Power group from Detroit, we gave them permission to leave and go aid the brothers and sisters running up and down the streets in Detroit and what. So we need to understand struggle. You know, y'all can sit and talk about let's do this and that, but the movement of history was pushing us to be more, to be stronger and struggle. And then that same phenomena was happening in the West Indies. The same phenomena was happening in South America, the Guyanas, and also in Brazil. So Black people were waking up worldwide and trying to take their destiny into their hands. And so one of the great things about Councilman Tucker, he became the leading councilman in Newark, and he actually set up an exchange program, a Twin City program between Newark, New Jersey, and Cape Coast in Ghana. And so we took 29 Black political leaders from Newark and around the country, the head of the Black mayors and all, and we went and established relationships with the continental Africans. And we had institutionalized chieftaincy, the Mompohini, the second in charge of terms of power of the Ashanti Nation after Atufo, the king. He installed two of the leaders, female leaders from Newark, and they were brought into the tradition, just like my wife and I were brought in at another part. Francis Cress Welsing's partner, who Segment, who what was that? Pat Newton. Her African name was Segment, but her local American name was Pat Newton. And so this relationship with the various segments of our growing conscious population was linking up. Now, I know your crowd is interested in the revolutionary aspects of all these things. And so it was real, because some young people were following us. And then one of them kind of looked like me, taller than me, but I think I looked a little more handsome than he did. But, you know, that's just a male ego, you know. But he became one of our partners, and here he is.
Right on.
Here he is, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. And my youngest nephew, who's a professor at Ohio State, I took him down south because I wanted them to go down south to go to school. He eventually went to Morehouse. And then when he did his PhD, he did it on Lowndes County. He dedicated it to me for everything that I helped him with, but it's really dedicated to Kwame Ture and Willie Ricks and all those people who set up a movement that moved our people to fight for the vote. And the symbol was the Black Panther. Right. So we know of Huey P. Newton and the rest of them that made the Black Panther famous in California, Oakland in particular. However, the Black Panther was the symbol of the movement in Lowndes County.
That's right.
And our brother, my brother, we were very close. We even had a situation where I was in the bank on Broadway taking care of some bank business, and the bank vice president came in all excited, and he went up to where I was taking care of my bank business. He said, come on out, come on outside. I said, what's happening? He said, he's walking up and down the street. I said, who? He's walking up and down. He said, come on. So I got up, went outside, and who was walking up and down the street eating an ice cream cone? But Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. And so we were very close to the extent that his great work, which we have here, Ready for the Revolution, Life and Struggles of Stokely Carmichael and quotes Kwame Ture. And then he did this synthesis of having coming from the Caribbean, so there was also already a fighting spirit of Garvey and other people from the Caribbean, Haitian Revolution and all the rest of that. He wanted to have, well, he wanted to link up with the revolutionaries in our African world. And so certainly Kwame Ture, that's a combination of Sekou Touré, the head of the Guinea Revolution, and Kwame Nkrumah, who was among those leaders in the Fifth Pan-African Conference in 1945, in which the Africans were declaring that they're going to set up nations and move out of colonialism and put aside the imperialism that comes with this colonialism. So Kwame was going to school down south, but he had a partner from the Caribbean, and his partner, Michael Thirlwell. He took an African name, Michael Thirlwell, and he was at the University of Massachusetts, and he helped Kwame write this book. How did Dr. Jeffries get in the middle of it? Well, Kwame came down to the city, and he met Michael Thirlwell, and they had a chance to go into one of my staff's apartments. She had two apartments on Convent Avenue, right near where Curtis Blow lived. He let me know that he lived on 140. I thought he lived on 141st, but he said no, he lived on 140th, the big apartment house there. Well, at 141st, we did buy a building which we turned into Dr. Clark House, and that's where we have our organization activities and whatnot. In fact, Dr. McIntosh had a fantastic several-hour activity on the struggle and to save Clark House. But if you go up to the end of the block, these 10 row houses, you come up to a big apartment house. And that big apartment house was where one of my staff members, Jerry Price, had an apartment. She also had an apartment in the building next door. Across from her two apartments was a big apartment house, and Gil Noble, one of our greatest TV persons, he grew up there. In fact, he was courting his wife on City College campus. And so, but what I'm trying to point to is that Kwame, Jerry Price, and her partner, Jeannie, they were on the radical side of the struggle with Paul Robeson. In fact, they were at that famous event where there were so many thousands of people that they were waiting to hear Paul Robeson and others speak. Well, what point I'm trying to make is that when Kwame came into the city, he had his own apartment, and him and Thirlwell could sit there and go over this enormous life story that he was able to put out. Now, when I'm coming from Jersey and scooting down Convent Avenue to get to City College, I see, and to get to the parking lot at the end of the college area, I see police cars, the college police cars and regular police cars. And I'm wondering what the hell is going on. And so I stop and pull over to the side. And then I noticed security well, and they said, Dr. J, a lot's going on today. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look at the top of the apartments. And I'm looking at the top of the apartments, and there are people with rifles and whatnot. And come to find out that Kwame was there at Jerry Price's apartment, but somebody came to visit him and share thoughts and ideas with him. And it was Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Oh, wow.
And so the minister was in there, and of course he has his deep roots in the Caribbean, and part of those roots are in Trinidad. Kwame is from Trinidad, family. And so these are the things that help to give us some sustenance, that there's a movement by our people in the different places. We need to join it, and we need to pass it on. And so Ready for the Revolution has been an enormous cry by Kwame. But see, in 1969, I went with Dr. Clark out to California to take on the white political organization, historical organization called the ASA, the African Society of whatever. And we were in African Studies Association. So Dr. Clark and a couple of other adults led us out there to challenge them. And who was the people that you're talking about Dr. James Turner, brother who set up the Cornell. After the Cornell students came out with weaponry wrapped around them when they had a takeover in Cornell, we had the same type of takeovers at City College. Black people was taking over and making demands. And so this type of thing had happened out in California, and eventually they got me to come out to set up the Black Studies Department. And San Jose State, the same as James Turner, was asked to set it up in Cornell, and then Ron Walters was asked to set it up at Yeshiva, not Yeshiva, the other Jewish school. And in fact, us young Tiger Cubs of Dr. Clark had this responsibility of setting up these programs. And if it took us showing off some weaponry or locking up college doors, that was done. That was the heavy struggle. So you had not only the struggle in the suites and of institutions and organization, you had it in the streets. And Kwame was able to, after his relationship with Bobby Seale and all, he was able to go to meet the Frantz Fanons of the world and the Algerian Revolution folks, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually Kwame decided to go to Guinea and take this dual name, Kwame Ture, there. And the beautiful thing was that when I had our group in San Jose, the first thing I said, we're going to go to Africa. So we took 30 people to Africa, 15 students, 15 community leaders, and 2 little girls, 8 and 11 years old, Lynn and Michelle, Dick Gregory's babies, his oldest children.
Wow.
Of the 10, he felt secure enough to ask my wife and I. He had just met us a month, and he had asked us, and since we were going, my wife went to Africa first in Nigeria before I even met her. That same program that I went on, she had gone on a year before.
Pardon me, Dr. Jeffries. Did you say that Dick Gregory met you all a month before and trusted you all to take his 2 youngest daughters?
Yes, his 2 oldest. He had the other,
wow.
his wife, his beautiful wife Lillian. She had the others were in her gene pool, but she took Lynn and Michelle, 8 and 11 years old.
Wow.
They gave them to us. That was reading the Dick is spiritual. He said he could see and read the spirit in my wife. And so the beautiful thing for us was that when they asked us to set up the Black Studies Department, after they had to take over too, same thing up in Berkeley. So the studies programs went along with Black demands. And so that when they asked me to come out to San Jose to be considered for setting up their program, I was anxious to go out there, and others went to other venues. I mean, all of us got a key spot somewhere. And with this program, these people out in San Jose were so in advance of what's happening. They had set up scholars coming in on a regular basis every week. And Dick Gregory came like 2 or 3 times a month. And who else came? Mervyn Donnelly. He was from the Caribbean, but he was a local political leader in California, who was also asked. A brother who was a darling of the San Francisco Bay Area crowd, and the women there helped to make him a great congressman. He eventually became part of the Black delegation in the Congress. But the other person who was very important was Alex Haley. Now, you had Alex Haley coming, the person from the Bay Area. He was one of the leading figures. The women had worked to make sure he was sharp as a tack, and so he eventually became the congressman. And so every week was some Alex Haley needed my knowledge of Africa to help him take care of roots. And so I actually eventually got him a $500,000 grant from the Carnegie Corporation to complete his research on roots. And so these are the things that we need. And then we had a big fight with the Hells Angels. And we had to, when I came to go to the big activity in the stadium with the Hells, with our a music group, the Hells Angels was there looking for revenge because a black person, one of their people, had gotten beaten up. Let me switch that. One black person was killed by the Hells Angels because of a riot at one of the big concerts. And so I'm going out we're having a concert, our students, and I'm riding out in my car to go to the stadium to check on things. And before I knew it, cars was coming out in the wrong direction, almost crashing with my car and whatnot. I pulled over to the side and come to find out that the black students had beat up the Hells Angels that had beat up a black man in the stadium. And so I said, oh God, we this is going to be a mess. And so I finally worked my way home. The Hells Angels came out on motorcycles and went up into the hills or wherever they do their thing. So then we had to have a police powwow. In other words, they had 25 of us go down with the head of the police and meet the Hells Angels. The head of the police son or nephew was a member of the Hells Angels. So we had to work up a war operation. And that meant that we had to have there was a red line between the atomic bomb between Russia and the US. So it was suggested that so that we don't have a mass explosion between the groups, that we have a hotline. And the hotline was between the sheriff or the head of police and me and my house. And then, of course, everybody knew who I was. I was the head of Black Studies. But all my partners, they had changed to African names. Charles Murray, who was the head of Black Studies at City College and was my main partner, big giant of a man, 500 pounds. And when they asked the names of our people, Charles Murray said, my name is Kalabula Jubidubi. I mean, he didn't give his real name. He came up with African names. But that was cool because I was the main person. And so the red line was between me and the police captain. But our people did not wait for me to press no red button for the police to come to protect me. They went around that campus with sabers and under their coats. They came up on my porch, rang my bell, and said, Dr. Jeffries, we got this for you. I said, what is it? And it was a violin case. I said, well, a violin case, I play the sax. They said, well, you'll need this. And they told me, they said, do not open your door. If they come up on your porch, shoot through the door. In other words, they gave me a 357 Magnum.
Sure. Nice violin.
That's right. It had the sweetest little sounds, and that gave me a lot of security. But they actually took the students from the various venues and put them in a safe house. I mean, that was it. But the big struggle in the San Jose thing was, again, another woman with an afro. We had Frances Cress Welsing, and she's famous for the afro. And of course, you had our sister of the Panthers, and she was famous for her afro. And but you also had our scholar sister, Angela Davis, who had an afro. So you had Kathleen Cleaver, afro, big afro, and our sister. And then you had, she was going to school at Stanford or UCLA, Angela. And she was with the Soledad brothers. They came to my office to see whether we could help them. And so we said yes. Our thing was to help our people no matter where they were and what the circumstances were. So they met in my office and we agreed to be supportive. And then the population was rather progressive. It was not as bad as San Francisco or Berkeley, meaning you had some crazy white people out there, but they were ready to fight for Black dignities. Of course, that's the school that produced the Olympic team in 1969. John Carlos and Tommy Smith were part of a historic Olympic team. In fact, Carlos was one of my students. In fact, I went down, I was with Dr. Clark to fight the white scholars at the African Studies Association. But one of our people who was from New York, and we had gone out there to join Dr. Clark and be his Tiger Cubs. And I presented my dissertation to wake these white folks up, because I said, they ain't gonna sleep on me like they're sleeping on others. And so, but this brother, Harold Weaver, came to me and said, Dr. J, there's a big problem in Mexico. I said, how? What does that have to do with us? We're here to fight these white folks to get a stake in the African Studies program. He said, you don't understand. I said, what the hell you mean I don't understand? He said, there's something big going on. I said, well, ain't no thing bigger than us. We can't handle 10 battles. What are you talking about? He said, the students have had trouble in Mexico, had trouble with its own students, and now there was trouble at the Olympics. So I said, well, what are we going to do about it? He said, we need to go. I said, how the hell can we go down to Mexico? We just had enough money to fly in from New York to Los Angeles for this conference. He said, you don't understand. I said, why the hell you keep saying I don't understand? I know how much money I got in my pocket. He said, for an extra $25 to your New York to Los Angeles ticket, you can go to Mexico City. I said, what? I said, shit, let's go. And so we did. We jumped on a plane. I went down to Mexico to join Carlos and them, and met him at the hotel. I forgot the name of that hotel, but he was in the same hotel, Hotel Dinamique or something like that. But at any rate, I met John Carlos. I was going up and he was coming down. He had a fifth of Johnny Walker. And they had told him that, Black Power fists had disturbed the Olympics, and Mexico was already in trouble with their students riding. I think several hundred may have been injured or killed. And John, being asked to leave, he had a fifth of Johnny Walker in his hand. So we greeted each other, and he went down and I went to my room. He had to get out of Dodge as soon as possible. And then, unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish. I speak French. Je parle très bien le français, presque comme le français. That has been able to help me deal with the work of Cheikh, Anta Diop, and all these other French-speaking scholars, Amy Césaire and the rest. but Spanish I didn't know. And John Carlos and them had raised their fists and they became heroes of struggle. And so people, students, thousands, it looked like hundreds of them, thousands of them were hanging around the Hotel Diplomatique. That was the Hotel Diplomatique. And they were looking for Carlos. And even though Carlos is taller than I, he's browner skinned than I, when they saw a black man coming out the hotel, they said, there he is, there he is. And they started running to the hotel and catching a hold of me so they could give me a hug and this and that. And so after a while, I just had to say, I'm Carlos, and I couldn't say I'm not. I just took all the hugs and this and that. So I had a chance to see the most fantastic Olympics. The Jamaican team, the running team that has been famous for their runs now, but they got started at that point. And every time the Jamaican team won, the black fists went up, joining Carlos. They had a brother who was the long jump. I forgot his name, Lehman or something like that. His long jump was so long that the people said, ain't nobody, he beat the world record. They said, Bob Demon. They said, nobody can leap that far. You must have been cheating, or you're smoking some drugs, or so they did all the testing, and he set the world record. Wow. And so he was raising. Then you had this white boy who had a high jump, and he had developed a new way of jumping over the high bar and twisting his body. And every time he jumped and did his record thing, he raised his fist. Once he got to his feet, he raised his fist. This was the Flosby flop person. But the biggest event, which I had a chance to experience, was 80,000 people in the stadium. And they were for the marathon. And I was jumping and screaming, yelling like with everybody else. But I didn't speak no Spanish, but I knew that they was yelling because the race was exciting. And all of a sudden, at the end of this marathon race, into the stadium, kicking it, was Mekele, one of the Ethiopian who set the first Ethiopian, Tanzanian, Kenyan runners, long distance runners. And he came kicking in the stadium with no shoes on. People went crazy. And so that was my introduction to California. And so when they had asked me to set up the Black Studies program, I didn't know it was going to have all of these dynamics, but it did. And, the beautiful thing with me was I set up a summer program, and that's what the Gregory girls were on. Ron Dellums was the Oakland person who had, and Warren Wagner, he was running for the mayor of Oakland. So he was a part of this. That San Jose area had a lot of life and whatnot. Berkeley had a lot of life in. But their thing was mainly third world. Our thing was African, because anything I have anything to do with is African. Ron Dellums became a conscious African. Merv Donnelly was a political leader from the Caribbean who lived in that, and he became part of the Black Caucus. And then Angela got in the picture. And then I had to work with her. Dr. Jeffries, you mean to tell me you were hooked up with Angela Davis? I said, yes, I was the leading African Black person in San Jose. So when the Soledad brothers came, they didn't go for no white people. They came to my office, and we said we would be supporting them no matter what, and helping the wives and the mothers. And then with Angela, she had made her move, and they had arrested her. And so Dick Gregory, giving his little lectures at the Black Studies Department, always added something special. And so he said that if you want to know whether your phone is tapped, just don't pay the bill. Now, I thought that was a joke, but no, it wasn't no joke. And I'm going to follow Dick's joke. And so I didn't pay my bill. And they didn't cut it off. And but then one day I was backing out my driveway, getting ready to drive to the college. I had this old Chevrolet, and my wife called it the tut 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 machine. But it was only 4 or 5 blocks to the college. So I backed out, and I'm looking up at the pole, and there's somebody on my pole.
Wow.
Doing something up there. So I said, before I run to the office, let me go to the telephone company and see what the hell is happening. And because Dick had already told me, don't pay the bill in there, and they ain't going to, they're not going to cut it off because they got you tapped. So I went in, and the head man was a black man, a young elderly man. And he said, well, can I help you? I said, yes, I want to know what's happening at my house. I see somebody on a pole over my house, and what's going on? He said, well, who are you? I said, well, I'm Professor Jeffries, head of the Black Studies Department at San Jose. He said, well, you don't have a problem. I said, yes, I do. What is that man doing on my pole? He said, relax and sit back and let's talk. He said, you're the head of Black Studies. I said, yes. He said, don't you think that your phone should be tapped? I said, well, I didn't know what to say. He said, that man up on that pole ain't the problem. He's doing the job professionally. Our problem is when the drug and whatever administration, when they start tapping our phone system and putting the things wherever they want to, and that causes a problem. He said, we don't have to worry about your phones are tapped. They need to be tapped. You ought to be glad they're tapped. And I said, well, damn, I came in here to raise some hell, and that man has stripped me down to my underwear and beat my ass. And so, and I felt bad, but he said, look, we don't have to tap your phones. We could put a bug in your rose bush outside of your house and tap you. We could go away 2 blocks away, several blocks away, and then beam your house. If you're the head of Black Studies, you should expect to be tapped. And that was a growth thing for me. And then I realized what had happened. The word went around the revolutionary circle, particularly the communist circle around the world. And everybody was calling into San Jose. And they wanted to know what the community was going to do to help Angela Davis. Well, we had already met and already decided that we're going to fight with the sister. Right. And so that had already been made up by our community, old, young, white, and black. Even the Chicanos joined us. And so we were supportive of Angela, and I got to know and appreciate her. And she had a sharp mind. And then come to find out she had a sister that lived in the same complex where my adopted father in New York lived. She lived off of Amsterdam Avenue. So, and then she had a couple of 3 or 4 kids. And so the Angela Davises became a part of the struggle in a real way. We became clearer about struggle, and so we were able to expand it to Africa. So when we decided to have this course, a traveling course through Black America for for a month, and through Africa for another month, and we took students. We took 16 students signed up, and then 15 community people, including a lawyer in a wheelchair, Mickey, and he had his man buddy who moved him around in the wheelchair. And then you had the 2 Dick Gregory kids along with the students that we had. And it actually turned out people who didn't want to go take the course, because you got course credit, traveling throughout Black America. So we left the Bay Area, San Jose, went down to Los Angeles, went from Los Angeles over to Texas, went to Houston, and then to New Orleans, then on to Mississippi, Jackson, and then on to Alabama, and then got to see a sister, Margaret Walker Alexander, who was at Jackson State. And she was a friend of ours. She would have my wife and I come all the time to spend a week there. And then we went on to Atlanta, Big Apple, and Morehouse, and then on to North Carolina, and then further up to Washington, D.C., to Howard. And then we got to New York, and we were ready to go out to the airport to get ready to go to Africa. And so we had our community group, and we had the little Gregory girls, Lynn and Michelle. And we left New York, and we flew to Paris to make the connection down to Africa. And we were minding our own business. And all of a sudden, here comes this powerful force coming at us. And I didn't know where it was. I got hung up with Dick in San Jose. Whenever he came, he had the Ouija board. He was always playing some damn Ouija stuff. And we're looking for him to speak 1,500 students, so they're ready. And he was in my office with a Ouija board. And so I couldn't interrupt him. You know, I'm polite enough to know that's, you know, you can't just tell a brother, come on, they're waiting for you. So he had all of them had 5 people had their hands on this little Ouija thing. And the question Dick asked, who is the next president of the United States? Who will be the next president of the United States? And then their hands started moving, R and I and C and H and ARD. I said, "Oh my God, it's going to be Nixon." And so, but no, when they went for the last name, it was Dick Gregory name. I said, "Oh God!" I said, "Yo, come on in here. People are waiting for y'all." And so he did go, and he came into and he knew how to present, and Dick was marvelous as a presenter. But when they gave us the kids to take, and we had gone through America, they went with us, and then we got to Kennedy, and then we flew to Paris. A group of Black people with kids, a great, powerful force came at us. And before I looked up and saw it, this force was trying to grab our babies, Lynn and Michelle. And she said, "Who are these lovely children?" I said, "Well, they're Lynn, Dick, and his wife's Dick Gregory." She said, "Oh my God, I knew them." She got on her knees, grabbing them and hugging them. She said, "I knew them when they were toddlers." And so when we were worried about getting to Africa, but everywhere we went was positive information. Josephine Baker giving an acknowledgement to the Gregory kids.
Wow.
And then we flew to Senegal, and then we flew to Guinea. And then that's when I have pictures, slides of Kwame Ture with my students, Sister Phyllis, who was in charge of the girls. And she was talking to Kwame Ture in Conakry. And, but I didn't want to stay in Conakry because when I went, my first year in 1961 was Ivory Coast and the neighboring country, Ghana. Second year was Senegal and the neighboring country, Mali. Third year was Guinea. And so I had a work camp. We were building the foundation for a youth center in the mountains of Guinea. So my thing was to leave the capital where they had all the official business and go up into Mamou and show them where I had my work camp with 21 people. And it was a big to-do. And So we did. And then after we went to Mamou, we went further up into the mountains, in the mountain range to Pita. And then we went further up to Dalaba. And Dalaba is where Kwame Ture and Miriam had their home, a hut, a two-story, a hut that the roof was two-story. And it was so large, it had 5 rooms of red carpet. And that's when we got up into the mountains and we were going to greet Miriam Makeba. I could still see her coming out of the mist of the those mountains, in the Futajala Mountains. And when she saw the babies, she went crazy too, just as our sister, Josephine Baker. So the Gregory kids were such a powerful tool for people. The Africans had great respect. You're bringing students, you're bringing adults, you're bringing elders, and you're bringing babies. And that was the greatest tribute that we could pay. So most recently, they had the son of, I don't think Stokely and Miriam had any children, but the son for her previous marriage, I think she may have had a couple marriages. One of her marriages was Hugh Masekela.
Right.
Now, I was close to Hugh Masekela. So this youngster was showing the history of Miriam Makeba, and then he actually went up to the mountains and he talked about the red carpeting. I said, oh my God. In other words, I was mentioning that, and then he was mentioning it. I have to get Charles to see whether we can get a copy of that tape. But Miriam was one of those icons that we related to. Hugh Masekela and the loudmouth was a part of the Jeffries experience. And his name, the loudmouth, I'm looking at him. Don't bother. I'm looking over my shoulder, and there he is with Malcolm, our warrior leader, and there's a painting of a photo. Charles, don't touch it. Don't touch it. I'll just tell you, you got enough stuff out here now. We haven't even talked about the Diop book that I helped get translated. And we haven't showed them the Renaissance Monument. But in back of me is a photo of Malcolm X, our great warrior leader, and he has 2 babies on his knee, Attila and Gamela. And then next to him is a grinning Chessy cat, and that's Muhammad Ali. And he has the 3rd child the 3rd daughter on his lap. And so that's a beautiful photo for me, but that is actually clipped. Betty is in that photo, but she's on a cushion with the 2 twins, the one who just died last month. And we had a beautiful burial for her. And so I need to find the original picture and put the original picture with the picture that cut Betty out. It was intentional, but they just wanted the two men leaders in there. But Muhammad Ali, and I said, and then people are going to say, there you go, Dr. J, putting yourself in history. Well, I can't help it. My wife lived on 115th Street. The Muslim mosque in Harlem was 116th Street. And she used to have to go to, she was the oldest daughter, so she used to have to go to the grocery store on Saturday. And the grocery store was right across from the mosque. And so she would be getting her stuff straightened, or if doing the laundry, whatever. And then she would see somebody on a ladder talking, carrying on with a crowd of people around him. And that was Malcolm X. And she had a chance to actually relate to Malcolm because she had her middle brother got hooked on drugs. And she felt bad about it because she was helping to raise the boy, and he was a wonderful young man. And but when he got a chance to go into the mosque, Malcolm advised him to break out of the drug habit, and he was sent to Hawaii. And that brother has been a drug instructor, saving people from drugs for the last umpteen years. And he just called here recently. I couldn't believe it. That's sort of name coming in from Hawaii. And it was my wife's middle brother who is doing fine. And so when we put these things together, people will say, well, Dr. J, you know, are you exaggerating? I said, I don't have to exaggerate. I don't have to exaggerate. When we talk about Ali, I met him at the mosque. I went over and joined the crowd, and I had my African outfit on, so I was noticeable. And then Ali's brother, who was his bodyguard, saw me, and he reached out and he talked to me and said, are you here to meet and greet? And I said, yes. And so he allowed me to come in and greet Muhammad Ali, which I did. That was one relationship with him. And then later, I had a chance to go to the Congo to take care of some business. And who was in the Congo? Somebody called Muhammad Ali. Not the Rumble in the Jungle. That was Manila. This was his great odyssey in the Congo. I was at the Hotel Continental in Kinshasa, Leopoldville. And my wife and I were there I had business about our program and the Crossroads Africa program. And Rosalind was resting, and I was trying to take a shower, and I heard somebody singing. He couldn't sing. And so I told my wife, I said, he's making a lot of noise, but he sure ain't sounding right. And so, that was my little quick unnecessariness. And then so later, when I was going out of my room and he was coming out of his next door, I looked up and saw him, and it was Hugh Masekela.
Wow. And you said he couldn't sing?
In other words, when I was listening to him, he would, but of course he could play.
Right.
Now, Hugh Masekela was there for the fight. He was in charge of, when I later talked to him at another venue, he said, yes, I remember. He said, I was in charge of the entertainment. And when they had the injury to one of the fighters, that delayed the fight. So I had to add more entertainment, and some people couldn't stay more than 2 or 3 weeks. And so they had to go back. But he was explaining, his particular role in the struggle. But the biggest thing with Hugh was that I had a chance to meet with the Pan-African leaders in the different venues, whether Ethiopia, whether Cairo, whether Accra, whether Dakar. And one of the great meetings was in South Africa. And this was necessary because South Africa, we fought for Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela and all of that. And so South Africa was targeted for special treatment. So 2,000 Black leaders, one of the biggest meeting of Black leaders in history, were together in South Africa in an area that looks like Atlanta. I call it Atlanta. It's named after Mandela now. It's Mandela Square. And but we were in this big conference center. It was just like Atlanta, where you got these big hotels that can have attached to them all these big centers. And so 2,000 leaders from the Black world were together. And I had a special seat next to the bigwigs. I had a special table. And next to me was Mugabe, who was one of the leaders of the thing, and other leaders. And not too far away was Dinkins representing Black America. And you had some of the leaders from the Caribbean. You had a representative from Cuba, a representative from Brazil and Bolivia, etc. And then the table that I was at was right in the middle of everything. And so when they brought out the entertainment, there was a beautiful sister imitating Miriam Makeba. Then the curtains closed. And then they opened up again. And there was Hugh Masekela in the flesh.
Wow.
And he tore the place up. People was up. Mugabe was up dancing. I was up dancing. Oh, my goodness. My buddy from Trinidad, who had a heart attack and stuff, and he couldn't stop dancing. I said his wife going to be mad at me because he danced his way all across the whole floor from Trinidad and Tobago. He's used to these type of celebrations. And so that was one of our greatest movements. I have a picture of myself in one of the African magazines where I'm surrounded by the delegation from America and the Caribbean. And I have the picture of the Renaissance Monument, that enormous building, complex built in Senegal. And even Senegal didn't bring a copy of the monument, but everybody, they wanted to borrow mine so that they could properly show it. But the Renaissance Monument is the victory. African peoples from the different ideologies have built a monument to Black power, to the Black future, to Black people, to Black future. It's the tallest monument of its kind. And in it are the great works of our great leader, Cheikh Anta Diop. And that's why I have a chance to show this particular volume, which is in French, and it's Civilisation ou Barbarie. This is the original copy that I took, that I had in Paris to translate. Dr. Clark gave me my orders. He said, we can't wait 20 years for this to be translated into English. You need to take a sabbatical leave and go translate it. And, following my elders, I took that as a responsibility. But I said, Dr. Clark, we're expanding the Black Studies program, dealing with all of these activities. I can't go in 1980. I said, and I can't go in 81 because we got to go to Egypt. And 82, we took 1,000 people, a big crowd to Egypt. So I said I can go in 83. I went in 82 or 83, but I couldn't go when he went. And I spent the year. The responsibility was to translate this book by this revolutionary leader. And I was successful, except that when the first 100 pages of the book is Diop talking to the scientists of the world. So in order for me to get into scientific French, I had been there, I had gotten a certificate from years before that I was proficient in French, and I passed all the exams that they gave me, the first American in 15 years to do so. But now I'm dealing with this scientific data and names. I had to get 40 books to even begin to seriously deal with it. Wow. So finally, I opened my big mouth at the World Council of Churches. I was there as a consultant. And I said to the man who was in charge, Dr. Philip Potter, that I'm not satisfied with the world bodies of churches helping out in the struggle in South Africa. I said the churches need to do more. And so Philip Potter said, Dr. Jeffries, if you don't think we're doing enough, I'm going to put you in charge of a task force to deliver more aid to South Africa and Southern Africa. And so my heart was jumping for joy because I could take this book and put it on the shelf because I was sinking in deep water with this. And then I concentrated on producing a book, which was South Africa in Crises. That was gone out to the world bodies of churches to help the big struggle going on with the apartheid movement and the suppression of the black dots. In other words, wiping out black communities, coming in with bulldozers and knocking down these township dwellings that they had. But the women refused to accept defeat, and they developed what they call survival villages. And the black men who were pushing these steam shovels to take away the African housing, they had sense enough to give secret signals to the women to say that tomorrow night we're coming to your house. They call it the black dot. We come to your village. And so the women, and this is the beauty of our struggle, the women would roll up the tar paper, roll up the sticks, etc. And by the time the fellas came to knock it down, it had been moved in the night. And they had this enormous fight of the women saving these towns. So actually, South Africa gave up on tearing down these towns because black people would come and put them back up. They took them down, walked them away, and then came back and put them back up. So this is the type of beautiful experience I was able to translate and put on the table. And so among the books that I really am very proud of is that as a result of our work in South Africa, we became very close to Winnie Mandela. And so I have photos of Winnie in the middle and holding on to my wife and I on each side of her. And she came to Newark to help us, our women in support of the Million Man March. So several times I was there. Well, I helped. My wife did the curriculum for the Million Man March product, which is a child development center in Newark. So, brother, it's our latest pilgrimage. Diop's work has been recognized by the Museum of Natural History in New York, which is the largest of its kind.
Right now.
Museum of Art.
Metropolitan Museum of Art. There's two. There's Metropolitan Museum of Natural History. That's on one side, and that's for the artifacts like the paleontology. But the Metropolitan Museum of Art on Fifth Avenue, that has one of the largest African collections from the Nile, and has one of the largest collections of traditional African art from the different parts of Africa. So for the first time, and if you get a chance, get any material from the Metropolitan Museum, and you'll be able to see that they have combined the traditional art of Africa with the art coming from the Nile Valley, that Diop and his partners have. This is one of his partners, Theophile Obanga.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Who
Yes.
came to Temple University and added realness to the work there. And then he went back to set up a university in Brazzaville, Congo. And eventually he had to leave that. But Brother Troy, who had been one of his students at Temple and wanted to complete his PhD, Brother Troy went to Brazzaville, and he worked with Obanga, who had gotten a little soft as an administrator. So, and when they were in Philly, they used to jog 6 to 8 miles.
Wow.
And so he got Obanga back into that jogging thing, and Obanga got his manhood back. But then they were afraid of his university, so they tried to destroy it. And in fact, he got word of the incoming danger, so he sent his wife and family up to Paris. He stayed at the university, but when they came for him, he was ready. They tried to burn his books and whatnot, but he was able to get many of them out. And then he ran through the rainforest to escape his enemies from his native land.
Wow.
And Troy has to be given a great deal of credit for it. Albenga now got back to Paris, and he was trying to connect with the work of Cheikh Anta Diop, because he is the biggest interpreter of Diop's work. But then one of our people in the West Coast in these United States had trouble with their leadership, and so they needed a strong leader, and that was coming from the Bay Area. And so my suggestion, or somebody's suggestion, was said that Theophile Albenga is available. And so he went out, he spent 5 to 8 years helping to develop the Black Studies program at San Francisco State.
Okay, now that's where I met him at. I hosted a Black August event out there in, I believe, 08.
Oh, okay.
And and he was on the bill. So that's
Right.
actually where I met him physically in the Bay in Oakland. Yeah. So that's interesting. I didn't know how he ended up out there. And it was funny because a lot of the folks that were there didn't know who he was.
Yes.
And I was excited because of the fact that, I was serious about Cheikh Anta Diop and so many others, but I knew the work and I heard the stories of them with the wheelbarrows of books full of books and whatnot,
Right.
going, challenging the French, I believe that was
French,
right?
the French scholars. I mean, in other
Yeah,
words, two of them challenging 50 or 100 French scholars, and they kicked butt.
Right. Yes. So I was excited to meet him, and I think he was kind of surprised that I knew who he was because I was looking like militant man, with the fatigues and everything on. So, but yeah, no, that's real interesting that you said that's how he got out. I always wondered, how did he?
Because there are strong people in the Bay Area, but they already had institutions. Wade Nobles had an institute, and that institute was doing great work. In fact, in '87, when we went out there, they hosted the first, what was that conference, Charles? Melanin, the first Melanin conference.
Okay.
And so Wade had an institute of a Black family, and so he didn't want to take on responsibilities of managing a program, and so that you had Vulalewa and others who were in San Jose area, but they're also attached to San Francisco State. And so it really is a great history of the family and the family struggling together. Wade has hooked up with his partner, his buddy, Naim Akbar. And so they try to bring some Africanists to the Society of Black Sociologists. And then also they extended it out with Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing and Pat Newton to Black psychologists, Black psychiatrists. And so, and then you had the power couple who had gotten their grounding in Washington at Howard. And that's where some of the greats were trying to establish a meaningful Black African studies, Black studies program. And so one of the first persons to set up a meaningful Black studies program was Nathan Hare. Well, Nathan Hare was, he was a character.
And Dr. Julia Hare, correct?
And yes, and they were a power couple. They
Right.
try to call my wife and I the power couple, but I said there's several of us. Wade Nobles and his wife is a power couple. Pat, my wife and I are a power couple. You go to Atlanta, you got our brother and his great wife, Asa Hilliard. You go to Chicago, and you got Dr. Jake Carruthers and his wife. In other words, so this concept of a power couple, we need to spread that around because we've been able to stay together as family, and even Wade's son Omar, when we were at the conference in San Francisco on melanin, we were planning to go to Africa with Dr. Ben. And then Wade had said he plans to go, he would like to go also. but he doesn't think that he can go because his wife has been has the potential for polio or whatever. She was incapacitated. So he said, but even though we can't go, I'm starting a practice in my family that when my children graduate from either high school or college, he said they will get a trip to Africa, to the Nile Valley. And so, but he said, he's got these medical expenses now, so it's going to be difficult. So I said, don't worry about it, brother. I'm glad to meet you. I heard a lot about you. We will take your children to Africa. So his oldest son was ready, Omar, and so we took him. He wasn't the oldest son; he was one of the sons, and we took him, and we have adopted him. So we're the uncle. He calls me Uncle Lenny, and Charles knows that we just sent him some ducats to handle a big problem he's dealing with, and then he's going to help me put together a trust because we have so many books and art and thousands of books and art and whatnot that we need a trust. This foundation we have is not enough. And so the Noble family, they made sure that their children and the girls got to Africa. Wade maintained his institute, and then even when he moved to Texas, they have continued the work. And one of the great things was that we had a big conference organized by the Senegalese, Professor W.E.B. He's a professor, but he's also the president of Senegal. He was, and he took on the task of having another world conference, and they asked me to help round up African Americans and African Caribbean people. And so we got 45 people to go as presenters or backup presenters, and we had several hundred go to participate. And part of it was the inauguration of the Renaissance Monument, this unbelievable, humongous statue, larger than anything else in the world, in which the African truth is manifest, not only in the structure itself. The Koreans built it, Africans designed it, and it's the rise of the black man leaning on his rock, the black woman, and holding up to the creator and the creation, the black child. Right. And so it's a very powerful image, and you can go inside of it.
Wow. Okay.
You can take an elevator up 16 stories.
Wow.
Into the mind, the head, and that head is so large that 35 or 40 people can be in there looking out at the area around Dakar port and airport. And the beautiful thing is that there was an exhibit under tents outside of this enormous statue, first of its kind, the only one of its kind. And this exhibit was put together by Diop's a French wife who was a scholar herself into geography, and she had 4 or 5 boys that had his genes, and they have become scholars and scientists and whatnot. One works for the French nuclear industry. That's Mbaki, the oldest. And he has taken the lead in doing a biography of his father and putting together all of these early images of him. And he and his mother helped to put together Diop's collection. And in that monument, with the black man standing on his rock or holding onto his rock, and it's a volcanic, a dormant volcano. and holding his child up to the future. The child is not pointing to Europe, where we have been trained to look for sustenance. The child is not pointing to Mecca, where a good part of the world population looks for sustenance. The child is not pointing to south, to the rest of Africa. The child is pointing across the Atlantic Ocean to Africans in the New World. It is that link of Africans in the New World with the old world Africans that is our future. And that's the theme of this whole work. I've been inside. They have places where you can make presentations, you can have plays, you can have exhibits. They have a collection of books that's probably one of the greatest. And I've had a picture taken in there, and in back of me were images of the African great leaders. So they had W.E.B. Du Bois, along with Aimé Césaire, along with Malcolm X, along with the great leaders in the African continent. And so, and in one of the pictures, I am there with the youngest son of Marcus Garvey. And his older brother is a part of the Jeffries village here in Teaneck, New Jersey. He just made his transition some months back, Marcus Jr. But when my wife and I would leave this house and we wanted to go for our walk, we would go out the door, walk 4 blocks further to the north, and then turn down the park, and then hit Hamilton. And then we would go knock on the door, and Gene Garvey would look out the window and say, "The Jeffries are here, the Jeffries are here." And they'd be carrying on. And then we would go inside doing our kissing and hugging, but being there for 3 or 4 hours discussing the struggle. So that's the key to what you're trying to do now. We need to bring out these historical images, but know the personal relationship that has been developed by all of us. You get into your little conflicts. Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark had a semi-conflict. Dr. Clark didn't appreciate the aggressiveness of Dr. Ben because, he said there's only one thing that's important in the world, and that's the Nile Valley. Right. And Dr. Clark wanted to say, well, that's part of it, Dr. Ben, but there's another part of the African world, which includes the part of Africa out of the Nile Valley. It includes Black America. It includes South America. It includes the Caribbean. Dr. Ben didn't want to hear none of that. He said, well, I can deal with a little bit of the Caribbean because his stepmother came from the Caribbean, came from St. Kitts. Right. But Dr. Clark says, that if you don't know the Nile Valley, forget it. You ain't into nothing. Dr. Clark said, that's not right, Doc. We got to expand this thing. So I've been in the middle of the interplay between the two of them. Love them both. My wife loves them both. The people that I know love them both. And Doc Ben gave us the gift that keeps on giving, the Nile Valley. Forever and ever, it is there as the key to the role that Black people played in raising culture and civilization. And then Dr. Clark was interested in Ghana because he knew Nkrumah, and Nkrumah had went to Lincoln, and then he had a triangle of getting to know Africans. Azikiwe was there, the head of the Nigerian leadership, was also at Lincoln. And our brother Kwame Nkrumah went to be a preacher. He wasn't thinking nation building, but once he got there, the explosion was happening in Ethiopia and other places. This African and the 5th Pan-African Conference actually was planned. Then Nkrumah expanded his consciousness. And so Dr. Clark had met him in New York because there was a triangle of knowledge that Nkrumah was involved in. He would be at Lincoln, where you had this tradition of Black Americans and folks from the Caribbean getting an education, just as I mentioned, the Nigerian leader. But he needed to know, he needed to move through Nkrumah, through this triangle, the foundation of which was Howard University. And Howard was trying to put together scholars like Leo Hansberry and others, and eventually Mercer Cook and others, to deal with Africa. They didn't want to go too heavy because white folks was looking for prestige in white scholarship.
Right.
Well, Hansberry and others, they said, we got to look to the African world. And then part of the training in Howard was Chancellor Williams and his, the destruction of Black civilization,
Right,
and then
right.
the rebirth and whatnot. And so there was a struggle at Howard over who was going to speak for Black people. White folks decided that these Black nationalists were not going to do. So they picked a legitimate Negro scholar, and he was selected to be the head. And he turned out, he was good, but he was not nationalist. And so eventually they moved past him, but he has his series of works. And Harold Cruz was another one who was kind of in conflict with the African nationalist types. And in fact, he became the father of sociology. But eventually, Howard had to open up more. Dr. Mordecai Johnson, the president, he was interested in getting favors from the white moneyed community. So he didn't want too much Black nationalism on the campus, but eventually it began to grow. And one of the people that was a part of John Clark's Cheikh Onwuachi, he was a part of AHSA, the organization we set up to deal with ASA. And so they began to develop an Afro-American studies. In fact, at one point, I think when the brother who headed he was the first Black cabinet member. He became a leader of Howard, and Cheikh. There's the Cheikh brothers on the West Coast. That one was the head of Morgan State, another was the head of Howard. One of them came out of Claremont on the West Coast, and they all offered me some kind of positions. At one point, the guy that set up HUD, he said, I have 3 or 4 departments. You have your choice. Could be Afro-American studies, could be African studies, or urban studies. And then those are the 3 areas that I did have, my degrees in. And so, but I did not, go in Howard. I went to San Jose.
Dr. Jeffries, we gonna have to bring you back again, because I know that we can go on and rock on, and you have about 100 people listening at your feet right now, as if we was at if we was somewhere else. But I want to ask you, because we have about 5 minutes. But
yes.
one question I want to ask, if you can lay out for us, I would say the importance of our culture in revolution, because I think that oftentimes many of us get caught up in so many different struggles and ideologies, but it seems like when we talk about our culture, folks stray away and they come up with excuses, so on and so forth. So I would like you to, if you could, in closing, speak to that.
Yes, I'll be glad to, because that is key. Culture is the key. That's why I used again that pyramid, where you have economics as the foundation for living on the planet. If you don't have economics, is your food, clothing, and shelter. Economics is what you have to have. Your productivity. If you don't have an economic capability, you're going to die. But if that economics just stands by itself, then you're not going to be able to manage it. You need politics. The politics is the management of your economic capability. So I teach in terms of systems analysis that the economics and the politics have to go together, but it won't service you unless it involves culture. So I use the pyramidal formulation that I have here: economics, politics, and culture. Culture is the deep values. And I used to put a circle and have spiritual values as the key. And so we have to have all three of those working for us at the same time. And if you do, then you can deal with the greater problems of putting nations together and deconstructing your slavery and imperialism and whatnot. And so, that's dealing with the culture is the key. But by culture, we mean more than shaking your behind. Now, ain't nothing better than watching an African behind, whether it's from the Caribbean or from America or from the continent. Yes, that is a phenomena. And it's certainly when Africans start to dance, they ain't gonna stop. They in it for seriousness. And it's usually a collectivity. You can't go to an African ceremony without wanting to get up, and they'll come and get you. And you can't say, well, I don't know how to dance. That rhythm starts moving through you, and you'll be up there just like everybody else. But culture are the deep values of how you raise family, how you create generational levels, how you tap into ancestral wealth and spirituality. In other words, how do you make sense out of a golden stool? And the myth of it coming from the sky and the great priestess landing it on the lap of the future leader. So they have this, the Shanti are so tied into that golden stool that there is an incident when the men were not responding enough when the British wanted to sit on the golden stool. So one of the queen mothers said, if ye men of Ashanti don't have the courage to fight the British who have insulted you by wanting to sit on your sacred stool, then we men of Ashanti we women of Ashanti will move the men out of the way, and we will take over the warrior position. And so that becomes a whole deep tradition of our people, because we got our Harriet Tubmans, but then they got their Ya Asantiwa, and so what we're saying is culture is the key, and culture means how you prepare to survive and grow and develop on the planet, and how you prepare to beat back your enemies who want to use their cultural initiatives, like the white folks and the imperialists. And unfortunately, too often the Arabs have that thing in their culture where they feel they need to dominate and enslave African peoples. So that's why I'm so glad that when you look at the sweep of history, that change took place in 1952, 53, when Gamal Nasser and Naguib, the Africanized generals of Egypt, for the first time took over rulership of the Nile Valley, and you had black men ruling in the Nile. So Nasser is 52, and with Naguib, and eventually you had the Iranian revolt 53, 54. You had Dien Bien Phu, the Vietnamese Ho Chi Minh. 55, you had the Bandung Conference, where the new African leaders and the new Asian leaders were getting together to deal with the larger question of imperialism. In 56, you had the Sudan. 57, you had independence in Ghana. 58, you had independence in Guinea. 59, you had independence in Cuba, I believe. And then 60, you had independence in a dozen African nations, including Nigeria, including the Congo. And so this fight for nationhood is not something that we accept as a defeat. It's an awakening of our people globally. And so the work that I'm doing is, since I've had a chance to experience it in more ways than one can believe, I need to make sure that I pass it on. So you and your folks would be as good an example of me loading you up with African stuff that you can't lose with the stuff we Africans use.
Amen. Say the word, we'll send the U-Hauls. Ain't no problem. Tell Brother Charles, the Jack Flash with it, and we'll we'll work it out. But definitely, brother, we absolutely appreciate your contributions to our culture. We appreciate you spending time with us this evening, just going over history, and supplying us with these works. It is a powerful image.
Right. It's larger than the Statue of Liberty, larger than Jesus the Redeemer overlooking Rio. In fact, when we went to visit Jesus the Redeemer at Corcovado in Rio, we, for the first time in 2003, the base of the Jesus the Redeemer statue was open. Charles, don't be worrying about it. And they had the shrine of the Black Madonna, the shrine of the Black Madonna, for the first time. Africans. I thought you were going in the China closet to get the shrine. The shrine is in there. The little statue is down in there. But my wife would say, "Look, you all."
They have me get thrown out the house.
That's right. Charles would say, but he's actually getting. The image is that my nephew, Hakeem. Hakeem is the political leader. Hassan is the scholar. He's at Ohio State. But
Right.
this is the image of the shrine of the Black Madonna in Rio. And it
Okay.
follows the shrine of other great Catholic shrines, such as the shrine of Czestochowa that the Pope worshiped. That's the Black Madonna. And so they want to say candles burned up the face of the Black Madonna. No, it's a reference to African people's role in human development. And the divine principle. So when the popes leave here, as Pope John Paul, we have a newspaper article, a whole centerpiece with him in the Great Plaza in Rome. And he's being put into one coffin, into another coffin. And it looked like those are some of the traditions that the pharaohs of Egypt used to be about. And sure enough, the activity is taking place in the plaza of the Vatican. And what is the dominant figure in the plaza? It's a Tekken. It's so-called George Washington Monument, standing right in the middle of the Vatican. So if the cultures of the Nile was not sacred and whatnot, why would the Europeans be farting around with it? Why would the French drag Tekkens, symbolizing the resurrection principle of Black folk? Why would they drag it all the way up the Mediterranean and then take it to France and then drag it all the way and put it in their great triumph, the Place de Concorde, and all of those things? But if Africanness meant nothing, why would you all go out of the way to even try to get African bones and say that there's some cure when you get African bones? And so they started a whole industry of them digging up African cemeteries so they could have a bone. So if white folks was so anti-Black, why don't they stay away from our sacred spaces? They know the real deal, and it has now been portrayed for the first time in great display at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And so when you get a chance, and if we get a chance to have a later presentations, I'll make a connection with that museum, where they are honoring not just the regular Nile Valley monumental building, they're honoring the work of the Dogon, the work of the Yoruba, the work of all of these African groups. They are acknowledging. And so we will do what we can, and then Charles and I will figure out what kind of bill we should be sending you. But
Well, I tell you what I'll do. Well, you said you'll figure out kind of bill.
yes, but Charles
Okay,
will say we could give him to him in African money and Ghanaian cedis and stuff, Nigerian money that don't last a day or two. In Ghana, we had to have a shopping bag to
right
carry
on.
around $100. I said, this is really ridiculous. We go into some little place, a money changing place. We go in with a bill or two, $100, $50, and we come out with a shopping bag full of their money. And I had trouble with the money too. I didn't mind the Chris new money.
Right on.
African women hold the money close to their heart.
Without a doubt.
They hold the money, and that money has the ring, the spirit of life in that. And they go into their little pouch and come up with their money, and you got a whole lot of stuff going on.
Maybe that's where my grandmother got it from, when she would tuck it down in the shirt.
That's right. I believe that's African carryover.
Right on.
Anyway,
Right on.
brother, I feel
Hey, brother.
great that we're able to have us on. I had to give Charles his kudos. He
Right
gets a little tight when I jump on him because he's getting tight, but he should understand what Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben would do for us. Now, Dr. Clark would never be nasty, but he could let you know he ain't happy,
Right.
and then Dr. Ben was nasty. Dr. Ben would physically grab you, like I saw him grab Jacob Carruthers,
Wow.
diving across my conference table and grabbing after Jacob Carruthers, saying, you two are whole like two weeds in a pot, or two. I mean, it was unnecessary. Jacob Carruthers was one of the nicest person to walk the earth. And here you gonna try to grab him physically in my conference room, and we got a big conference downstairs. But luckily, I steadied the ship, and it was agreed that we formed the ASCAC organization, which we did, Association of Study of Classical African Civilization. And then Dr. Ben said we should go to the Nile, and it was agreed. We met in Chicago the next year to establish an official organization. And then I said, you meet in New York the year after, and we'll put the finances under the new organization, which we did. And then I said that, and we agreed at this meeting where Dr. Clark is trying to beat up on Dr. Carruthers unnecessarily, it was agreed that we put all the conflicts behind us, and then we would prepare to go to the Nile Valley collectively. All of the schools, the Atlanta school, the Washington school, the Texas school, the New Orleans school, San Francisco West Coast school, Portland, Oregon school, Canada, Toronto, even England, Birmingham, and other places, we had agreed to go and leave our mark in the Nile Valley, and we did. We had almost 1,000 people go. No trip like that has ever been taking place of people really interested in reclaiming their sacred ground. Chicago organized it. New York put the financial thing together. And Chicago, with their organizational skills, they had something like 40 or 50 buses, air-conditioned buses that took us through the countryside. And when the people saw this stream of buses, it was like a train going down to the valley of the Nile. And so I have great respect for the various schools that we developed. And I have great respect for Dr. Ben, because he was so glad to be a part of, to have us not take 100 people or even 200, to take 1,000 and put him on his throne of African glory. And so that's what it's all about. And we have to raise these different traditions. I know some people say, well, Dr. J, well, who are you? What are you, an African traditionalist? Are you a Muslim? Are you a Christian. I know you ain't no Catholic. You got more sense than that. But whoever is African, no matter what their faith, they have the potential of being part of the larger family. Ain't no need for us to divide each other because of some sacred text or some taking of African traditions and weaving it together into their tradition. So we need to see that monument in Senegal as the key to the rebirth of a new African way for the future. And so that we can put aside the conflicts and find the unity formulas. And that's what Africans have to do in the face of this enormous Chinese population that's growing by leaps and bounds, moving into technology. The Indian population, between the Indian population in Asia and the Chinese population, African people, although when you use our collective, we have more than 1 billion people, but the most of our people have had the benefit of Western world experiences. And so we do like to have our cars and our big houses and our bling bling, our drum, and the rest of it. Whereas the Indians, with their structure of unfortunate of that whole process where some people are considered not human, and they have the various stages of who and what is who. With the Delite people, the Brahmins at the top, that Indian thing, but they're growing to 2 billion people. There's at least 1.5 million of them. And then China got Mao Zedong tried to control it, but again, that wasn't possible. So they limited the Chinese growth rate to 1 male child. And so they have a overbirth of males. And so that surplus of males, they're sending it out to different African parts of Africa to marry African women, because we have in much of Africa what they call the line of succession and land passing through the female. The Chinese are not hesitant on marrying their young people over. There's one story of a young fellow, 18. His daddy put pressure on him and he married an African so he could get control of the land. Then they tried to use the younger brother, 14, to do the same thing. He said no. He protested. I want me a Chinese woman so I can build a Chinese family. But we need to look into the fact that Africa is so rich and other people need its richness if they're going to continue their march through history.
Right on.
So, brother, I'm leaving it there.
But Doctor, before you close out, there was a question. There's a question in the chat. They were asking to clarify on Dr. Ben's mother. Is something you said something about her being Puerto Rican or Ethiopian. Could you clarify that?
Well, Dr. Ben, and here he is. You can see how he can put that evil look and eye on you. So this is our Sons of Africa. We formed as a group that we had to pass the traditions on to. These are the scholar warriors, and you have to my right, you have Professor Small. Then you have Dr. Ben. At the center, you have Dr. Clark. And next to him is from the Caribbean, Professor Scobie. And then you have Dr. J. And all of us had our contributions to make. And all of us have made it. And so that Dr. Ben finally accepted that he could share the Nile with us. And so instead of beating us up, he brought us into the craft. Now, George G. and James had talked about the African, the debt owed to us. And Dr. Ben was going to say that that craft that George G.M. James talked about is still alive. And he has been given the authority to bring people into the craft. And into that craft, that meant following his laying out of what the craft is all about. And so many of us did join the craft. But he said that in order for us to be a part of the Egyptian craft, there's a special process. But in order to deal with the larger brotherhood, there's also a special process. So to give us coverage in the larger brotherhood, we had to become Masons, either through Prince Hall or Solomon, King Solomon. And so Dr. Ben successfully was able to do that, and then to link up with Dr. Clark, who had a special feeling for Ghana because he knew Nkrumah, and then he met Nkrumah when he became the head of state. He met him in Ghana, and Nkrumah got him a job in one of the newspapers. But Dr. Clark wanted us to see a larger Pan-African world. And they eventually, in a ceremony at the First World Alliance, which was a community forum which was copied all around the world, Dr. Ben pulled one of his surprises. He took his mystery system belt, this fantastic belt of gold leaf and whatnot, and he had a ceremony in which he put it on Dr. Clark. And I still have strong feelings on that. It was wonderful to see those brothers declare to the world that no matter where history pulls us or kicks us or stomps us, we are brothers. And with the brotherhood, you have a complementary sisterhood. And so Doc gave us that. Now, he was born in Ethiopia, of Ethiopian parents, I believe. You could look at Dr. Ben. He's melanized. He got full lips. There's no mulatto in him. Okay? His father was the ambassador of the emperor before Haile Selassie. And his father's responsibility was the Western world, including the islands of the Caribbean and Brazil. But once Haile Selassie came to power, the father no longer was a member of the diplomatic corps of Ethiopia. And since his base had been the New World, he stayed in the Caribbean. But at one point, I believe, he remarried. In other words, he found a person he could love and care for in the Caribbean, in the Virgin Islands. And so this became the second mother. I'm not going to say stepmother. Africans don't do no stepping except when they're doing their dances and stuff and their ritual performances. He took a wife. The birth mother of Dr. Ben, I believe, may have passed. He took a second wife, and she was from the islands. And she raised Dr. Ben as her own, which is the tradition that's in our cultures, whether Native American, or whether African West Indian or whatever. She raised him, and he loved her as his mother. He had a picture of her that he carried close to his heart most of his life. I had a chance to see that mother, and she looked like my biological mother. She was light and bright, and she had visions for her son. And so Dr. Ben I'm not going to say anything about it until I talk to his oldest daughter, Ruth, and then let Ruth put the official stamp out. There, Ruth has, Dr. Ben had a set of twins, Ruth and Naomi. And the one who was heavily melanized was Ruth. The one who had a lighter shade of glory was Naomi. Ruth was the oldest of the twins, and she took over like Dr. Ben. She's taken over Dr. Ben's collections. She told me she has, and I was glad to hear it, that many of the original manuscripts of Dr. Ben and special things she has, it wasn't destroyed. We thought it might have been destroyed, but it was not. So I'll talk to Ruth about just this thing. That, but please don't go on the airways around the thing and say, Dr. Jeffries said this about Dr. Ben, and oh, his mother, and this and that and that. But let's be family and put some of this truth out so we can prevent confusion. African women are the mothers and fathers, are the mothers of the universe. And so they mothers the people we call fathers. So Dr. Ben knew the centrality of the mother principle, and he was an example of it, that the woman who raised him was his mother and gave him the vision of loving African peoples, whether they come from the Caribbean or from Black America or from the African continent. So, brothers and sisters.
Hey, man, this is Class with Dr. Jeffries. For folks who do not know, you know what I'm saying? This is a very special treat, I will say. You know what I mean? This is someone that, like I said, just sitting in audiences throughout time, throughout my growth, I wouldn't imagine that I would be sitting here interviewing this Baba on his works and his energy and his effort, and it's
and the legacy of the great ones. This is Dr. Clarke's one of his many books. You got to have these books in your library, even if you don't read them, look at them. Even if you don't read them, just put your hand on them. This is Africans at the Crossroads, and certainly we're at the crossroads. We've been at the crossroads for the last 100 years, and before. But there is a future. Notes for an African world revolution. Right. This is this brother who could be one of the sweetest brothers in the world. He's talking about revolution, the unfinished revolution of Nkrumah, the unfinished revolution in Kenya, the Mama, the unfinished revolution of Malcolm, the unfinished revolution of Patrice Lumumba. And so when I saw a tape of Dr. Clarke laying out his belief system, as close as I've known him in all these years that we have been partners, my mouth was opened up wide for his analysis and whatnot. So you're talking about twin pillars of Africanness in the New World. It's Dr. Clarke and Dr. Ben. But both of them love Black women. Dr. Clarke was writing articles on the Black woman in history. Dr. Ben says there's nothing else better than the Black woman. So we're not talking about worshiping and putting and prostrating before men. We're talking about doing that for the African family. And that's where the big difference is. That's where the rubber meets the road. Whether you can understand and appreciate that you've been blessed, that this is a blessing. It's not a curse. And it can be used in all kinds of ways. You can go the Muhammad Ali way. You can go the Stokely Carmichael way, Black Power. You can go to Wakanda, a movie way. And this is the sacred crossing of the heart for the African burial. So don't think that this Wakanda is something new. They actually used something important in our history and made it so Black people went to the movies like I have never seen them go. I've been going to the movie ever since I was a little kid, watching the cowboys and Indians and all that mess. But this movie, Wakanda, I saw 4 or 5 generations together going to the movie. The granddaddy, the grandmama, the mama, the daddy, the younger children, etc. I mean, no matter what you say about Wakanda, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. It moved us internally and psychically in ways that we have not done except for through our music, like brothers and sisters who can get and sing. Like, what's my favorite, Charles? Sweet Love. Yay!
A.B. Anita Baker. I know you're talking about Anita Baker.
In other words, and then, I played sax for 10 years, 12 years. I had an alto and a tenor, so that Coltrane and the rest of them, and how they used music and whatnot. And then the fact that we had a little place called Motown in Detroit was, so we need to tap into this thing. In Detroit, they had Barry Gordy's home, a mansion. There's an area which has all these mansions. He was there. And then his guest house was a mansion. But the important thing in Detroit for me is the museum, this beautiful museum in the middle of Detroit is personal to me, because in 1950s, when I was studying the urban crisis in America and traveling across the country to go stay with my uncle in Los Angeles, I went through Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Detroit, Newark, Akron, and the Kansas cities, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, and then on to the Bay Area, and then down to Los Angeles, where the oldest of the Jeffries sons lived. And the beautiful thing was that this David was, the oldest son was a Mason. And then he had also found a job that he had for 50 years. They had given him all kinds of awards and whatnot for 50 years. And then my mother and them used to go out to visit. And there's a picture of our mother on the lawn of David's house. And that picture is similar to Dr. Ben's mother's picture. I'm going to ask Ruth if they still have that picture, and then I'm going to compare the closeness of my mother sitting on the lawn of Uncle David's house and Dr. Ben's mother. So, just connect with the plan. Dr. Clark was head of us. He wasn't going to take one mother or two. Dr. Clark said, I had 3 deities in my life: my grandmother and my mother and my 5th grade school teacher, Evelina Taylor.
Right on.
And that's Dr. Clark. And they saw his genius and they laid the foundation for it. And he rewarded all of us. Says Dr. Ben has rewarded all of us. So stay strong, family.
Hey.
Put the bull crap aside and step into your African world and be the greatest. As Muhammad Ali said, be the greatest.
Hey, Baba, we love you. We appreciate you. I will be reaching out to you again soon. We want to wish you a happy birthday. 85 is a big thing. You know what I mean? I'm gonna celebrate for you down here. I ain't gonna tell you what I'm gonna do, because you know what I'm saying, I'm liable to say anything. But anyway, we definitely appreciate you.
I'm gonna let folks know that I am celebrating not a day, but a year, and it's relating to an epoch, that we are in the new phase of African consciousness and that we need to understand it. And so I'm going to notify as many people as I know that we'll be raising monies to make sure that these projects that we have can be followed through, that we can save Clark House, and that money. I just had a talk for 2 to 3 hours with an African brother who I thought was in America. And in those 2 or 3 hours, we had gone over history like I've never gone over it with anybody. He's doing his PhD on African history.
Right on.
And I thought he was in Wisconsin I thought he was in the Chicago area in Evanston, Illinois. But no, he's in Ghana, and he was trying to connect me and Dr. Clark with his mentor, and that's Charles, our brother from Nketia, Dr. Don Nketia, who is his uncle was a good friend of Dr. Clark. And so Nana Nketia is his advisor. And it was Nana Nketia told him to try to make contact with Dr. Jeffries. But I thought the brother, he was as clear as if he was in one part of my house talking to me. And but he was in Ghana, and he wants to go on to Ohio State. He's applied to get a teaching position there. And then when I called him back again and we talked, he says, well, Dr. J, I'm a Fulbright. I said, a Fulbright what? He said, I'm a Fulbright scholar. I said, where are you located? He said, I'm doing my Fulbright research in Ghana, but I've applied for a position in Ohio State. I said, brother, I'm glad you were able to put that out there. I'm going to let my nephew at Ohio State know that there's a young man who is in a key position because, no matter what we do, culturally, we're in a weak position because we don't speak any African languages. And if we do, we don't speak them strongly. And so to have this brother who speaks, in other words, he was mentioning all of these works and whatnot. I said, brother, I've adopted you. Charles doesn't even know. Charles going to say, how come you do all of these things and don't tell me? Well, it wasn't no need to tell him. Charles hadn't called me all day, and I wasn't worried about the call because I was on the phone with this young man. And he's been in my phone, and he had talked to me once before, but he said, Dr. J, I'm in.
Right, talked to you a few times.
Huh? The young fellow?
Yeah, he talked to you a few times.
Yes, but he's just
doing research.
Yes, he's look. If we had 100 of him, they could turn Africa upside right. It's been pushed over, stomped on, and messed with. But this brother is. I said, look, I'm asking him to go get things. I said, well, check on Nigeria, Azikiwe. And he goes and puts it in the computer. And I said, well, where did he have his schooling? And then he comes up with Livingstone. And not Livingstone, outside of Philadelphia. But Lincoln, he came from Lincoln. And then I asked him, I'll put in Dudley Thompson. Dudley Thompson is one of our adopted uncles. And his grown children, call me Uncle Lenny. But Dudley Thompson, all of y'all out there who can hear my voice still, look up Ambassador Dudley, Dudley Thompson, Thom, whatever, SON.
Yes.
And he adopted me as his protege. I went to a play with him on Thurgood Marshall, and Lawrence Fishback did a good job. And after that play in New York, he said, Dr. J, we're born on the same day. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm on January the 19th like you are. And from that point on, we became like uncle and nephew. He's one of our greatest exemplars of African family. He was close to Jomo Kenyatta. He helped save Jomo Kenyatta and the Mau Mau movement personally.
Right.
Jomo Kenyatta loved Dudley Thompson. Julius Nyerere, same thing. He became the minister for Jamaica in terms of African struggle. And so he became the ambassador. Dudley Thompson went to London. He was a Rhodes Scholar during the World War II. He was an RAF pilot blowing German planes out of the sky. And then when he finished that, he came back and went to Oxford or Cambridge. He became a Rhodes Scholar. I call it Rogue Scholar, meaning the Cecil Rhodes, right, who try to mess with African peoples and steal their wealth. But this Dudley Thompson is a person that when we get a chance to talk again, to show how wonderful his deep roots in the Caribbean. He was born in Panama because his father was with the folks from the islands of the Caribbean helping to dig the Panama Canal. Wow. But he was raised as a Jamaican from Westmoreland in Jamaica. And he helped to organize the first reparation, the best reparations conference we had with all the African nations that was put together by Abiola, the leader of Nigeria, who eventually at one point most likely could have been murdered by people opposing him. But reparations, he took my document, the famous document of my speech that had everybody upset with me. He took that speech and he put it in the reparations conference they had. And he took Professor Scobie's speech, and Professor Scobie was from Dominica, and he was my partner at City. He put his speech in. We couldn't attend, Scobie and myself, because my lawyer had said you need to be available for the Supreme Court trial. And so, but Dudley Thompson made sure we were there by putting our work in. So these are the type of things that should be shared.
Hey, Dr. Jeffries, yes. we gonna definitely bring you back for round 2 because I got about 1,000 more questions, but we ain't gonna do it tonight though. So what I am gonna do is I'm gonna say definitely, we appreciate your work.
Well, farewell, family. It has been great to know you, and make sure you don't go through the world empty-handed. Make sure you put the victory in hand. And so if you do not have this book as a part of your warrior weaponry,
you don't have anything. This
is a brother born and raised in Mississippi. He beat the miseducation of Mississippi education. And then he went up to Atlanta. He got into the elite leadership organization of Morehouse. Mm-hmm. And then he went from there to New York, the Big Apple. And he got the education that the Jesuits give to their best at Fordham or St. John's. But for him, the real education was the African family. And he put together a team of people. He may have passed on 25 years ago, but his team of scholars from the Caribbean and from Black America are still producing his great work. And so even you can go into glory, but if you've left the right people behind to carry on your work, it will be meaningful. Right. I told all my students, make sure you have Blueprint for Black Power when you go through life. I told the sisters, you be especially proud to have your copy of Black Power. Because when you're sitting on the subway and some crazed Negro, or even not so crazed Negro, but he's looking at you in the wrong way, and if he has nerve enough to reach his hand out and try to touch any part of you, just take Blueprint for Black Power and strike a blow for African liberation. and knock that Negro out and put some sense in his head.
Right on.
That was me teaching my students. Hey, we brought the classes alive in City College.
No
and
doubt.
College. Yes.
Listen, share the video, like the video. We're going to push it a little bit further. We definitely thank you so much, Dr. Jeffries, for joining us again. And we look forward to having you on soon. We'll have contact information so that folks can, contribute to any of your work. We'll get with Charles and we'll put it under the video
and what I would like to do is because Charles has been we couldn't do any of this without him.
Right on.
But I would like to raise some money, a pool of money that he can use. Okay. He doesn't know that I opened my mail today and there was his car that we helped him get on a photo. And he's only a few feet from, and they're charging him $50. In other words, he's in a hazardous situation traveling around. They are now filming these things. Charles, you didn't, I'm going to show you that. You were coming to a crossing and you slowed down, but they got you. They got you, brother. So
Charles got.
If Charles go hang with me, we got to raise a little bit of money.
We got to make sure. So
yes.
In the description, Charles, leave us there.
The Cash App I posted your Cash App info in the chat.
Okay, cool. So we'll definitely we'll look for that and we'll include it inside of the description as the
Charles is really trying to go in February to the Nile Valley. Now, and he wants me to help him, which I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But he'll be helping everybody. He'll see me, even though I may be 85 and heading down heading to glory. He's going to help these sisters and these young ladies that need some help. So we need to raise some money. I need to raise some money.
That need some help. Not the sisters and the young ladies.
Look, Charles goes for the babies. He goes for the young ladies. He goes for the invalid. Olatunji's wife, she's 93. Right. He's one of her major sources of support. My brother, who's into African martial arts, produced these fantastic children and has been by my side all this time. But he had been so much into martial arts, breaking bricks and doing all kinds of stuff, that now he's got his physical problems. Charles is there. Charles will go pick him up and take him somewhere and this and that. He's been a beautiful source of us dependent upon him. So we have to raise money for Clark House to make sure we revise it and others. So we're going to put that money in a tax deductible fund or something like that. We're going to come up with something on it.
We're going to get all that information, put it in the section. And I'm about to go to sleep in about 5 minutes. I'm gonna leave you and Charles on here.
You ain't gonna go to sleep because the white folks that are listening in, CIA and all these people say these Negroes think they got plans. We listen to all that they talking about, but that ain't gonna stop nothing. You so and so's can keep listening all you want and get an education, but that ain't gonna stop us. God's chosen people.
And he done put my business all out there. People in the chat saying, "But Charles, you out there getting tickets?"
Yeah, he got you wanted on Black Power Media, man. I don't know, Dr. J. I might have to get you one of them T-shirts, the Stop Snitching shirt.
Stop snitching.
You my man, but listen, I gotta go. We gotta go. Folks in the chat talk about stay on another hour. I don't know what they talking about.
Okay. Yes.
Y'all be safe.
Okay, thank you. Madasi P.
Yes.
That's the
Madasi P. Absolutely.
Akan for thank you. Thank you very much.
No doubt. Gratitude. You've been checking out Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Brother Charles, who we just found out got a ticket. You know what I mean? So we'll talk about that later. We want to say we appreciate you all for joining us tonight on Riot Starter TV. Stay tuned tomorrow, 4 p.m. We have another program. We'll be talking about why Assata Shakur is relevant in 2022. Why Assata Shakur is relevant in 2022. We'll be joined by the editor of Assata Speaks, Bibi Angola. She will be joining us at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Make sure you tune in to the Remix Morning Show in the morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. EST. We appreciate y'all. Riot Star TV, Black Power Media. Stay black.